We are the Muslim Ummah, and each day that goes by, the harder we try. In gratitude we pray to Allah. Chosen as part of the best of mankind, we spread the word of Islam.
Today, we all know that Islam is under the microscope. 9/11, 7/7, you have, people assassinating the character of Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I'm glad to see that in the house of Ahmad Deedat, the IPCI, where Sheikh Ahmad Deedat always defended Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when Sheikh Deedat was asked, what was your best lecture you gave, or your best debate? And Sheikh Deedat said, Muhammad, the greatest. And as I said, with his acumen, with the intelligence Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given him, besides being someone that engages people on the level of debates, he's also an academic, a barrister, and alhamdulillah, someone that addresses the issue from the point of view of the layman. Yusuf is always there for the one that is downtrodden. So when he goes for, he defends the downtrodden, or when he takes on the conglomerates of this world, what did they call him? They say Yusuf is a conspiracy theorist. Whenever you give the truth about 9/11, and if they know, they say, no, Yusuf, that is conspiracy theory. 7/7, conspiracy theory. Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had his enemies from the very inception. When he started his message, the enemies were there. He was exiled. And alhamdulillah, you know, all the generations will change, but the message will always be the same. So I would not take much of your time, because this will be a very interactive program. So whilst Yusuf is talking and giving you his presentation, please make notes. His topic being, does Islam inspire Charlie Hebdo type of killing? So inshallah, Yusuf, assalamu alaikum.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Amma ba'd, a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Sadaqallahu al-azim. Does Islam inspire Charlie Hebdo type killings? This is an important topic because of the fact that there is a perception out there that what you see in respect of what transpired at the beginning of January, the 12th of January, was somehow or the other particularly inspired as a result of what Islam teaches. So in the mainstream media, not necessarily the mainstream, but in right-wing publications, in missionary websites and so on, the argument is presented that these killings take place because Islam promotes and teaches you to engage in laissez-faire killings. Now I'm going to zero in onto that and effectively deal with that. But before we go into that, it's important that we see an aspect in terms of what's happening.
Voilà, tu as été interrogé sur ces caricatures de Mahomet.
J'ai refusé.
Refusé.
La vérité, qu'est-ce que je vais annoncer, je vais dire, ah ben nous, on rit de tout, et c'est normal, il n'y a pas de sujet.
Mais on peut dire que pour la première fois, le dessin, c'est un événement mondial provoqué par le dessin quand même. C'est rare, c'est rare. Non, mais comme dit Iris, on nous attend avec une grosse tête de Mahomet, tu vois.
Moi, je pense. Ouais. Je pense qu'on nous attend avec une grosse tête de Mahomet.
Parce que même Sarkozy, t'as vu, c'est étonnant ce qu'il a dit.
À Sarkozy, il a blindé sa phrase.
Par contre, Sarkozy, il va falloir lui rappeler sa phrase. Hein, parce que...
Oui.
Qu'est-ce qu'il a dit alors Sarkozy? C'est quoi ta phrase?
Je préfère un excès de caricature plutôt qu'un excès de censure.
Je vais peut-être voter Sarkozy finalement.
Mais oui.
Tu vois, quand je dis toujours, moi, que je n'aime pas dessiner Sarkozy parce que je lui fais plaisir, ben, j'ai pas tort. Ça leur plaît. Même si on leur rentre dedans, ça leur plaît.
Qu'est-ce que tu veux faire? C'est notre boulot de leur rentrer dedans.
Plus tu leur rentres dedans, plus ils sont contents.
En URSS, ils n'avaient pas le droit de caricaturer Brejnev et toute la bande. Tous les maîtres du Kremlin, ils n'ont jamais été caricaturés.
Ouais, t'as pas besoin d'aller en URSS. Moi, quand j'ai travaillé à l'UMA, personne n'avait jamais dessiné Georges Marchais ou un secrétaire du parti. Ça ne se faisait pas. Et quand tu vas à Cuba, il y a plein d'humoristes, il y a plein de journaux de caricatures, mais jamais il y en a un qui dessinera Castro.
Donc on a du pot, nous.
Ouais, on a du pot. La France est un paradis.
Bon. Vous croyez qu'on a la couverture?
C'est une bombe la couverture aujourd'hui. Donc, il faut que ça soit fort, ferme et que ça ne laisse pas prise à...
Je pense qu'il faut que ce soit une politique, tu vois. Pas une une d'enculade de chameau, quoi.
Touche pas à mon Mahomet, moi je la trouve vachement bien. Touche pas à mon Mahomet, c'est même la ligne de tout le numéro. Elle est super bien. Et elle est d'autant mieux qu'elle te fait mesurer comment on est passé de touche pas à mon pote antiraciste et à touche pas à mon Mahomet, ce qui est plus l'antiracisme, c'est l'anti-blasphème. Pour celle-là, elle est très très bonne, quoi.
mais il pourrait délivrer un message plutôt sympa, tu vois, un truc énorme.
Il dirait, il faut savoir arrêter une grève.
Mahomet, c'est un peu bonhomme. Il faut savoir arrêter une grève. Mahomet débordé par sa base.
La récréation est terminée.
Qu'est-ce qu'il dirait?
C'est Mahomet, alors là, il regarde les dessins et il dit franchement, ça m'a fait rigoler.
Ah ouais.
C'est la première fois que les Danois me font rire.
C'est bien la première fois. C'est bien la première fois.
Voilà, maintenant, il faut dessiner Mahomet. Alors, et moi, j'ai pas envie de faire un être grimaçant avec une barbe.
Tu peux mettre un
C'est la première fois que les Danois me font rire.
Ah ouais,
Fais un truc comme ça.
Si on fait rigolard, c'est vrai que c'est déjà ça le décalage.
Ouais, c'est ça.
On n'est pas obligé d'en faire deux. Non mais moi, en tout cas, l'expression elle est bien.
Parce qu'il a l'air gentil, c'est ça?
Ouais, le nôtre il est rigolard, quoi. C'est vrai.
Et du coup, c'est un truc aussi, ça dit, mais nous, on est respectueux de votre foi, justement, on considère qu'on lui donne plus de chance à votre vie. On considère qu'il est plus gentil que vous, que c'est vous les caricatures.
Bande de cons.
Non, mais oui, c'est être aimé par des cons, c'est dur d'être aimé par des cons.
Ça, c'est pas mal, ça.
Ouais, c'est cruel, mais c'est pas mal.
Voilà.
Mais je pense que ça reste que...
Oh, remarque, ça pète. Mahomet fatigué des intégristes.
Mahomet sous prosaïque.
Remarque, c'est chouette ça.
Non,
On met Mahomet débordé par les intégristes,
Ouais.
plutôt que par sa base. Et là, il dit, c'est dur d'être aimé par des cons.
en tout cas, il y a un truc qui est malin, c'est on n'a pas représenté Mahomet. On n'a pas vu, là on voit pas le visage de Mahomet. Comme ça.
Ah, putain, mais c'est plus fort.
Ah, c'est beaucoup plus. Non, c'est beaucoup mieux.
Le plan, ce qui est bien, c'est la position et tout. C'est quand même plus. C'est plus mou, ça.
Bien, alors, on se concentre. Qu'est-ce qu'il y a que vous pourriez regretter dans tout ça? Moi je trouve que la plus juste, la plus pertinente, c'est celle-ci. Qu'on s'attaque à l'intégrisme, hein,
C'est la plus forte, c'est sûr.
ça résume tout le canard. Pour une fois, la une résume tout le journal. Objection?
This was live coverage, giving you an example on the drawing. And this took place just immediately prior to the drawing of the particular cartoons of the Prophet, peace be upon him. Now, how does that make you feel, all of you? Does it make you feel angry? I mean, most of you are educated. Obviously, if it's shown to a wide audience, and you're going to find people abusing the Prophet of Islam, you feel hurt inside, correct? It's like if somebody, you know, when we were young, and you're fighting in school, and you see the bully coming across you, if he swears you, well, you could do it away, but if he swears your parents or abuses your mother and father, then you start a fight. And I always did that in school myself, growing up, that when someone picks on your family, then you are inclined to resist and start a fight. Now, similarly, here you see a situation where they're drawing the particular cartoons and their main aim and objective is satire, caricature. Now I'm going to explain what caricature is and what's the context and what's the background behind this. This is Stephen Chabonnier and that's Jean Cabot. You saw them in the footage earlier on. Both of them were shot dead on the 7th of June. But they were prime in terms of their role pertaining to drawing of cartoons and so on and so forth. But let me provide a background. What is Charlie Hebdo? We're speaking about Charlie Hebdo. What is Charlie Hebdo? Charlie Hebdo basically means Charlie Weekly. It's a weekly news magazine that sells something to about 30,000 distributions throughout France. Basically, it describes, it's a publication which is viewed as being on the extreme left. You know, there's the extreme right and there's the extreme left. Extreme left are people that are characterized by having ultra-liberal views and so on, which is quite odd here because a lot of the support for Charlie Hebdo after the shootings came from the extreme right, like the French Nationalist Front Party, who was actually caricatured by Charlie Hebdo over a number of years. So it's viewed itself as atheist, far left-wing, anti-racist, as it claims, and it purportedly publishes articles on different issues. Many people have the idea that this is a magazine which targets Islam and which targets Muslims in general. But in actual fact, the magazine targets different communities across the board. It first appeared in 1970 as a successor to what was then called Harakiri. Harakiri was a magazine which had been banned in France for having mocked the president during the Second World War, the famous Charles de Gaulle. And subsequently, in 1981, the publication ceased. But in 1992, the publication was resurrected, and it then went through a series of editors and changes over the particular point in time. The magazine is published every Wednesday in France, and its general outreach amounts to something like 20 to 30,000 people that basically get to view it. Now, after the shootings, that figure shot to 6 million. After the shootings, the figure shot to 6 million. And this begs the question then, that when Muslims engage in acts of violence, because we're going to also focus on that, who does it benefit? In any crime that is committed, we need to ask the question, who benefits? When you look at the cartoons, the Danish cartoons in 2006, when they were published in Jyllands Posten in Denmark, the number of people that knew about it were very few. So it was limited to a small community who were obviously engaging in mockery, and it was childish if you look at some of the cartoons. Subsequently, an Egyptian news magazine, an Egyptian tabloid, reproduced the same cartoons in Egypt. And then eventually, they created a mass furore. So what can you see? What you see is that when you give publicity and when you react, the reaction leads and foments mass hysteria, which then gives more publicity. So here's the argument. Someone wants to portray Muslims as violent, as cruel, as barbaric, as vicious. And then you have Muslims who do engage in the same thing. These Muslims fulfill the stereotype because they conform to the stereotype that is being presented by those who want to malign and insult Islam. And so that's a challenge in terms of how we as a community need to react and how we need to basically engage with those out there who are maligning our particular faith. There were different legal cases, and I want to show you the hypocrisy surrounding this. You see, after the shootings, immediately thereafter, Charlie Hebdo, they printed a magazine, and on the cover of the magazine there was a finger sign, up yours, meaning they were resilient. Western society is resilient. They don't back down to a minority. Why would they? They believe in oppressing a minority. The Algerians and the North Africans, all these particular people were a minority, and so from their perspective, it wasn't going to shut down the news magazine at all. The point is that as Muslims, we need to also look and define these particular elements or aspects which are described as freedom of expression or free speech. You see, freedom of expression in Islam is allowed, the freedom to speak. But generally speaking, from the Islamic perspective, it is against power, against established authority. We have the classical case of the Khalif Omar. When he was introducing certain legislative changes, in the masajid you have a woman who stands up and corrects him. So from that perspective, we allowed. Within European society also, freedom of expression was a positive aspect. Because at a particular point in time in history, the church was in control, they were dominant, they were authoritarian, and people who were astronomers, scientists were basically killed and massacred. And so freedom of expression in that context was viewed as standing up against authority. Today, unfortunately, the concept of free speech and freedom of expression has become very convoluted. Because when freedom of speech and freedom of expression is utilized against, for example, a significant minority, then it becomes an instrument of abuse. When a man is down on the floor, he's poverty-stricken, and you want to ridicule him, and you want to caricature him and speak out against him, is there any achievement in that? It's a shame on you. But if someone is a leader, a politician, passing dictatorial laws, and you speak out against that, then is that a noble act? Of course it is. And that's basically what freedom of expression is. So from the Islamic perspective, and originally from the European perspective, freedom of expression was not equated with the freedom to insult, the freedom to abuse. So when a Westerner talks about freedom of expression, or freedom to abuse, that's a double standard that is sometimes portrayed. And I'll tell you why. I'll give you an example here. In 2007, the Grand Mosque in Paris began criminal proceedings against the chief editor, Charlie Hebdo, who was Philippe Val, under France's hate speech laws because of the fact that they were viewed as abusing a group on the ground of their religion. The lawsuit was on 3 specific cartoons. One was the Prophet Muhammad depicting a bomb on his turban. You saw that. Most of you should have the Danish cartoons. And in March 2007, Le Tribunal de Paris acquitted Val, and finding that it was fundamentalists rather than Muslims were being ridiculed in the cartoons. Their position was, look, we are only describing and dealing with fundamentalists, not Muslims. But here's the irony. The irony is that a year later, in 2008, a column by a cartoonist called Maurice Sinet, who was part of the video I showed you, it appeared in Charlie Hebdo, and in that particular magazine, it referred to Jean Sarkozy, who is the son of Nicolas Sarkozy. Jean Sarkozy had announced his intention that he was going to marry a Jewish woman. And so, basically, the cartoonist in a cartoonic publication said, in reference to Jean Sarkozy, he'll go father's lad. Why? Because it depicts the idea that he's Jewish, they're financially in power, and so this chap is going to go find life. Afterwards, there was a complaint of anti-Semitism against this particular individual, and that was brought to the editor of Charlie Hebdo. What subsequently happened? The editor of Charlie Hebdo asked the cartoonist to apologize. The cartoonist refused to apologize, and so he was subsequently fired. So where was the freedom of expression there? Can you see what happened? In fact, the magazine's editor, Philippe Val, when he told Sainé to write a letter of apology, the cartoonist told him, I would rather go and cut off my own balls, and thereafter he was promptly fired by the magazine. He won a 40,000 euro court judgment against Charlie Hebdo for wrongful termination, but they never re-employed him again. So here's Charlie Hebdo, which is speaking about freedom of expression and free speech and so on, and you have a cartoonist who was just innocently insulting the son of Nicolas Sarkozy, saying because he's going to marry a Jewish woman, he's going to go far in life. He was viewed and described as engaging in something viewed as anti-Semitism. Can you see the double standard there? By the same magazine that wants to speak about free speech. Then you have another issue here. This is another classic example that happened this week. This happened in a forum in the United States in dealing with an individual called Henry Kissinger.
An activist from the anti-war group Code Pink attempted to perform a citizen's arrest of former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger when he arrived Thursday to testify on global security challenges at a Senate Armed Services Committee meeting. Kissinger served as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor during the Vietnam War under Presidents Nixon and Ford.
Arrest Henry Kissinger for war crimes! Arrest Henry Kissinger for war crimes!
Committee will stand in recess until the Capitol Police
arrest Henry Kissinger for war crimes!
In the name of the people of Chile, in the name of the people of Vietnam, in the name of the people of East Timor,
You know what?
in the name of the people of Cambodia, in the name of the people of Laos.
Senator John McCain lashed out at the protesters and called on the Capitol Hill police to remove them.
I've been a member of this committee for many years, and I have never seen anything as disgraceful and outrageous and despicable as the last demonstration that just took place about, you know, you're going to have to shut up or I'm going to have you arrested. Get out of here, you low-life scum.
30 minutes later, two more members of Code Pink interrupted Henry Kissinger's testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee.
Yet as we look around the world, we encounter upheaval and conflict and chaos.
Code Pink calls for the arrest of Henry Kissinger for war crimes. Vietnam, from 1969 to 1973, Kissinger, working for Richard Nixon, oversaw the slaughter in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, which led to the deaths of millions of people. Many thousands more died from the effects of massive doses of Agent Orange and from unexploded bombs that covered the countryside.
Chile. Henry Kissinger was one of the principal architects of the coup in Chile on September 11, 1973. A coup that overthrew the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende.
Thank you.
16 years of repression, torture.
The Code Pink protesters were taken out of the Senate hearing room, and Henry Kissinger continued with his testimony.
So the point is, what you can see here, freedom of expression that is free speech. Am I correct? They were speaking out against a war criminal who had a litany for more than 50 years of engaged in some of the most vicious and worst war crimes ever having committed. Were they given the right to express their views? They were removed. In certain instances, they are arrested and incarcerated and even beaten up by police officers. So the whole idea and the concept of free speech, as you can see, is something which is selective and something which is applied in certain instances and in certain contexts. Look at this example here. US-led war in Iraq claimed the lives of a record number of journalists. Far more journalists were murdered in targeted killings in Iraq than died in combat-related circumstances. At least 150 journalists and 54 media support workers were killed in Iraq from the US-led invasion in March 2003 to the declared end of war in December 2011. Because a lot of those journalists were documenting US war crimes, and so they were killed. If you look at the fatalities that occurred in Colombia, in parts of the Balkans during the NATO bombing of Serbia, nobody speaks out against that. And so the point I'm trying to emphasize is that when freedom of speech is used, it is used in most instances as an instrument of abuse that is basically taking place. How many of you know this individual here? Anyone? Raif Badawi. He's no relative of Dr. Jamal Badawi. But Raif Badawi, and I'll explain the issue and the context behind this. François Hollande, David Cameron, a lot of European leaders, together with Prince Charles, recently paid tribute to King Abdullah in Saudi Arabia when he passed away. Before he had left, Hollande spoke out against the fact that any situation or any government that engages in the suppression of free speech, that government should cease to exist. And beyond that, that was absolutely deplorable. But here's the irony. Raif Badawi is a blogger. He's a Saudi Arabian writer and activist and creator of the website Free Saudi Liberals. On June 17th, 2012, he was arrested for charges of insulting Islam through electronic channels and was charged for apostasy. Now hear this. He's not an apostate. He never apostatized against Islam. He never spoke out against Islam. What he was critiquing was fatwas that were being passed by certain religious scholars that, for example, you cannot build snowmen, children cannot build snowmen, ridiculous fatwas, astronomy is illegal, and so on and so forth. So he spoke out against that. He was sentenced to 1,000 lashes, 10 years in prison, plus a fine in 2014. Presently, what happens is that the lashes were postponed for a period of 20 weeks. The first 50 lashes were administered, and subsequently he basically became ill. Now the point is, at this particular juncture, these same Westerners who are talking about free speech in the French situation, why is it that when you have someone that is speaking legitimately about, for example, state repression, and he wasn't even criticizing the monarchy, speaking about religious leaders failing us, why is it nobody speaking about his rights? Can you see the double standard that is maintained when it comes to free speech? In Europe right now, there's someone that is in jail called Ernest Zundel. His only crime was that he was challenging the established tradition about the Holocaust. He questioned the role of the Holocaust and whether in fact led to 6 million Jews or the death of 6 million. David Irving, the British historian, was questioned insofar as whether the Holocaust led to the killing of so many people. He cannot enter Germany for fear of being arrested. So the same liberal democracies that speak about free speech and free expression are selective in terms of how it applies and when it should be applied. Can you see the double standard that is generally basically utilized when talking about free speech? Now coming back to Charlie Hebdo. Charlie Hebdo had a reputation for targeting all religion. Right? A lot of Christians, for example, including Christian missionaries, have spoken out in support of Charlie Hebdo, stating they have the right to publish what they want to. If they want to insult Muslims, they shouldn't do that. If they want to caricature the Prophet, they should do that. A lot of these missionaries, for example, are not aware of some of the publications of Charlie Hebdo. I'll give you an example. Here is a satire of the Pope, Le Pape Ariot, when he went to Brazil, depicting him in a shameless nude dress. How many Catholics, maybe not in France, but in other parts of the world, are familiar with that and would support that? Here is basically an image of Jesus. Here he says, "Sortez-moi de là. Je suis une célébrité. Get me out of here. I'm a celebrity." Jesus is saying that on the cross. Can you see a bad depiction? Many Christian fundamentalists who would be familiar or would support and condone the publications, and you come across a lot of them I've seen in South Africa. I've spoken to Christians recently in South Africa who question Muslims for getting offended about it, are not aware of these particular publications that happen. Here's another particular publication. It depicts Le Père, the Father, Le Fils, the Son, Le Saint-Spirit, the Holy Spirit, all in a sexual act. They described it as mervinge trois, or menage à trois. In a sexual act. Can you see caricature and insult of religion? Are these offensive? Would they be offensive? Of course. they could be viewed as offensive. How many Christians that would come out in support of the right for Charlie Hebdo to publish what they did would come out in support of Charlie Hebdo to publish these particular images that you basically see? Can you see? So at the outset, let's provide the context that Charlie Hebdo was not specifically anti-Islamic, it was anti-religion in general. But those who have rushed to the support of Charlie Hebdo on the basis that they have a right to publish what they wish against the Prophet, against Islam and caricaturing Muslims in general, would they equally rush to the support for images like these? We're not talking about killing the cartoonist, but whether these would be viewed as acceptable. Here is another particular picture. This is Mary, Maryam, La véritable histoire du petit Jesus, the birth, depicting the birth of Christ. Can you see? It's an image which puts Mary and Jesus in a compromised position. Again, from the Christian perspective, it can be viewed. This is Jesus posed next to Hitler. Moi aussi. Here is another image depicting the birth of Christ. And here the birth of Christ is depicted as a possible Muslim fundamentalist. Jesus is portrayed as a Muslim fundamentalist, and it shows Joseph and his mother Mary together with the bulls and oxen at the background, showing a significant amount of dismay at the birth of Christ. So can you see that what you see here? Then of course you've got pictures of the Catholic Church. This was the ex-Pope Benedict XVI. Faites du cinema come Polanski. What's the background to this is that you have a bishop which is telling the Pope about the pedophilic uproar in the Catholic Church, and the fact that there's now lots of litigation, lots of court cases and so on and so forth that are taking place. And then the Pope is telling him to keep quiet. He's actually in a cinema watching a movie by the movie director Roman Polanski. Now, if you look at the background to Roman Polanski, presently there's an arrest warrant out against him. He cannot enter the United States because he'll probably be arrested there and charged for having sexually molested and abused 12 and 13-year-olds. Just like the recent comedian Woody Allen, who is now alleged to have sexually abused, molested his own daughter. So the point is that, generally speaking, Charlie Hebdo had a particular view of caricaturing religion in general. The question we need to ask is this: would those who support Charlie Hebdo, in terms of publishing what they did against Islam, against the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and against anything that is Islamic, would they, with equal intent and with the level of vociferous support that they get, Je suis Charlie, we are all Charlie, would they defend the right of Charlie to publish some of these images that we see here? A lot of them who do not reside in France, a lot of them that are religiously minded, would be correctly offended by what they see. And so it's important in a situation like this that we don't take positions, we don't take polarized positions, that we don't see things in black and white. Those Muslims who rightfully, and I'll come to the issue now, condemn the shootings or condemn the killings, do not by implication support the publication of Charlie Hebdo, because of the fact that what you see here is designed to provoke and designed to insult. Now we'll look at some of the issues. This is a caricature depicting all major religions: Judaism, Catholicism, at least a Catholic variety of Christianity, and Islam. In 2008 there was a backrow, but in 2010 there was a law published in France about the burqa. You remember that? Now, generally speaking, that was a law imposed on a minority, because if you are in public and you wear the full niqab, which is every woman's right to do if she wants to, if she chooses not to, but if she wore the niqab, she could be fined. Okay. They are a minority. I mentioned earlier that freedom of expression is used or should be used to challenge authority, authoritarianism. When it's used against a minority, it becomes an instrument of abuse. So after the burqa ban, this was a publication that they did in Charlie Hebdo, or Au part de la burqa. And so it showed a naked woman, depicted a naked woman with apologies to the sister, running naked and calling for the burqa, that she wants a burqa. Can you see the abuse or the level of abuse that's basically depicted and utilized there? The images that basically started the whole furore were images like this. Here was an image, Ses dur d'etre ame par descons. It is sad, it makes me cry to be loved by morons. So again, it's depicting and targeting and depicting a minority. Ses dur d'etre ame par descons. This was earlier on. This was a depiction that happened in 2011. Le Coran says de la merde. This was a depiction showing the Prophet being pushed by someone that's Jewish. Don't mock him. Basically, it's a throwback at the reader. Don't mock him. The Prophet is, but this is basically mockery, what you see. Here is 700 coups de fouet, si vous n'estes pas morts de rire. 700 lashes to one who dies laughing. It's depicting the Prophet. This was in 2007 or 2000, I beg your pardon. This was in 2011 when there was the initial attack on Charlie Hebdo, or 2010. They described it as Sharia Hebdo. After the initial attack, they showed Muslim and the cartoonists of Charlie Hebdo engaging in French kissing, l'amour plus fortuit la haine, that love conquers hate, or love overcomes hate. And then more recently, which led to the furore, here was a depiction which caricatured what was happening in Iraq right now. Je suis le prophète abruiti. I'm a prophet, you moron. And then the guy who is executing him says, Taguele infidel, you are an infidel. Now the point is that in all these, this is another image, bad publications that are being shown. This was the last publication which depicted the life of the Prophet, La Vie de Muhammad, and it was written in book form. And what it did is that it caricatured certain aspects about the life of the Prophet and depicted him in a bad, insulting, and crude way. Now, if you look at all these particular publications, we know that this is not the Prophet. It's quite clear, right? These cartoons, many Muslims have a right to be offended. Am I correct? You have a right to be insulted. Am I offended personally? I'm not offended. I think they're stupid. They're silly. These cartoons are silly. They're ridiculous. They make no sense. They are deliberately put out there to provoke the masses. The cartoonists and Charlie Hebdo and the magazine of Charlie Hebdo want provocation. They want a reaction, because the reaction sustains the publicity. So when they get the reaction, it basically boosts their distribution scales. It boosts, for example, their particular interest in the magazine. How many of you knew of Charlie Hebdo before the publication? How many of you? Nobody. That brother there in the back. Very few of us knew about Charlie Hebdo. I personally, might have heard about it, but I never knew the finer details. How many of us know about Charlie Hebdo now? Well, probably half the world, more than half the world. How many of us know about these particular cartoons? All of us. And the same principle applies, just like the Jalan's Postan cartoons which were published in Denmark. Back then, if Muslims were never reacted, which was the intention. The intention is to provoke you, and you provoke, you fulfill what they want you to do. If they had not reacted, nobody would have known about it. Those images wouldn't have gone, and the mass mockery that you see that subsequently happened wouldn't have happened. So when we react, we fulfill the terms and the definitions that they want to place for us. What they are doing is wrong. What they're doing is abusive. Individually, we can take them on to say, look, these are provocative. This is hate speech. This is abuse. This is insulting. We can take them on through legal channels. Or if it doesn't succeed, we can engage them. We can engage them and create the level of discourse which doesn't fulfill the stereotypes that they basically want us to live out. Because they want to portray the idea you are violent, and then you fulfill that definition. Can you see? And that becomes a problem in terms of what happens. I want to kind of zero in onto what we see. We've seen the cartoons. They're offensive, right? They're insulting. If they're shown, you know, when you see them individually, it's silly because it's not the prophet. These are like Bart Simpson with a beard. It's like me drawing a figure of a stick and saying that's a prophet. That's not the prophet. It's any person who does that is an imbecile, right? This is not it's not like you have a photograph of the prophet and this is stupid. And these are the cartoonists that are killed. Now we come to the crux of the issue. These two brothers, Said Kouachi and Sharif Kouachi. One is born in 1980, makes him exactly my age, by the way, Shafat. Another is born in 1982. Who are these people and what are their role in this particular game? We are told that historically speaking, they are French citizens. They were born in Paris to Algerian immigrants. Now in France, there is a ghettoization of South Africa, of society. Unlike South Africa, you know, in South Africa we've come from a background of apartheid, where we define each other in terms of race, but none of us feel excluded. If we're African, if we're Indian, if we're white, if we're colored, belonging to all these races is what defines us as a South African. You remove one race, and then it ceases to be called South Africa, because historically speaking, we are all part and parcel. Muslims also, we came much earlier. But in France, in the United Kingdom, that's not always been the case. Muslims are very much new. A lot of them from Africa, from North Africa, were taken in by people who fought the war for and on behalf of the French, and then they subsequently stayed there. And then their children grew up there, but they were discriminated against. They were kept in ghettos. And so they grew up in places of poverty, like Marseille, and so on, where you have large concentrations of these populations there. And so this is the context and the background behind which these two individuals come from. They come from poor backgrounds, and they were orphaned. What happened to them? Sharif, both of them have criminal records. Both of them were part and parcel of gangs that operated in certain French cities. In January 2005, Sharif was about to leave for Syria, and he was subsequently charged. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison in France for his plot to apparently bomb the US embassy in Paris. And upon leaving prison, he got married. He got a job in the fish market on the outskirts of Paris. In 2008, he was convicted of terrorism and sentenced to 3 years in prison. And purportedly, he came in touch, allegedly, as they now claim, with Anwar al-Awlaki. All of them want to link them up with Anwar al-Awlaki when he was in Yemen. Said Kouachi apparently visited Yemen on a student visa, where he studied at the Sana'a Institute for the Arabic language, and there he apparently met a Yemeni reporter, and he befriended someone called Umar Farooq Abdul Mutallab, the alleged perpetrator of the so-called attempted bombing of the Northwestern Airlines Flight 253 in 2009. But now the problem is this: if you look at their lifestyle of these two brothers, they were not religiously inclined. They were not religiously inclined. They were said to have loved wine, women, and pork. Just like the 9/11 hijackers. You know, it's quite fascinating that all these people that purportedly state to act in the name of Islam, all of them come with skeletons in closets. Muhammad Atta, if he was involved in the attempted the hijacking of Flight 11 in 2001, about 4 or 5 days before the attempted hijacking, he was found purportedly, allegedly seen in a strip club. They were said to be drinking. The same principle applies here. These brothers, in a general, never came or purported to be anything religious. Number two, after the convictions, they were tagged and monitored by French intelligence, meaning that they were known to the bodies of French intelligence. Thirdly, their communications had also been intercepted, meaning they were on the watch list. They were on the watch list, they were monitored by French intelligence, and you have people that don't appear to be particularly religious. Or at least that's what it appears. But somehow or the other, they've got links with Anwar al-Awlaki, that's what the media wants to portray. Or they've got links with an individual in Paris, a chap called Farid Ben-Yatou. Nobody knows who he is, nobody's heard of him, but apparently he's the so-called spiritual leader, Farid Ben-Yatou, who also has links with Awlaki. The background of Awlaki, we're not going to deal with that today. If you look at his background, we've also find issues that are problematic. But the point is that these are individuals that never betrayed any form of religious, like many of us here, a lot of us, all of us here are committed with our faith, am I correct? In a general sense, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Some of us more religious than the other, but all of us have this conviction towards Islam. You don't find this here amongst these particular brothers, and this begs the question that if that is the case, then what is the motivation? What is the agenda here? Because if the Muslim Council of Britain and the French religious authorities or the French Islamic Council or the Grand Mufti in France condemn the actions of these particular individuals, what is the motivation? Why did French intelligence monitor them for years? And why at the critical point in time, nothing happened? No one foresaw this. And look at the killings and the manner of killings. They were not religious fanatics randomly shooting or blowing people in general up or in some. These were cold, calculated, specific execution-style killings. People come inside, used silencers, they knew who to target. And then they subsequently made away in a getaway car. Now here's another problem. When we saw these brothers, they were covered, right? They wore masks. All of you saw that, didn't you? Meaning they didn't want to be identified. But then that raises another question. If that is the case, why leave your ID cards in a getaway car? What's the significance behind that? Because French authorities and the head of police, who was investigating the case, he's since committed suicide. I don't know if you're aware of that. He's since committed suicide, but the French authorities stated that these brothers wanted to be viewed. They wanted people to know who they were, that they were basically representing the Al-Qaeda in Yemen. They wanted them to know. But if that was the case, why conceal themselves? Now, I'm just simply putting these facts out. I don't have conclusive facts in terms of what happened, what transpired, what was the motivation, because these people, these two brothers have since been shot dead. So no one will know at the end of the day what really happened, who these guys were, Said Kouachi, Sheriff Kouachi. One thing we do know is that they are monitored. Today, if you look at criminal organizations, how they operate, and if you look at authority, I deal with criminal matters regularly, daily. And you find quite clearly that investigative officers generally have people who they call as informers. And generally informers are linked up with criminal networks. And sometimes they are granted immunity in investigative cases where they become 204 witnesses. We don't know exactly what role these brothers say. And so there are two issues here. One is the issue of freedom of expression. And the other is the issue as to whether Islam inspires Charlie Hebdo type killings. I've spent a lot of time explaining the issue of freedom of expression and the duplicitous double standards. But I think we need to zero in on this particular issue. That as a Muslim, we do not support the actions of these people. They were not acting in my name, nor were they basically engaging in actions which are viewed as Islamic. Even if one were to argue the fact that someone who engages in tyranny against a state needs to be punished, in those circumstances, there's a process and due process that needs to be followed. It's not even a debate. It's not a moot point. It's not even a moot point in Islamic theology or from the Quranic perspective. What they did has to be condemned. We don't know who they represent. We don't know their background. Their background seems to be shady. And we cannot claim that these people knew anything about Islam or had even read the Quran itself. But what is portrayed now in the mass mainstream media, that what these brothers did is intrinsically because this is what Islam teaches. And that's the issue that we need to focus on. Now, this takes us back to the Quran. When we talk about looking at the Quranic text, there are certain rules and guidelines which we have to follow. Anybody's familiar with Surah An-Nisa, chapter 3, verse 7. It lays down certain principles in interpretation. Muhkamat, mutashabihat. When you look at the Quranic text, or the interpretation of any text, the interpretation has to look at the text and the context. In other words, our interpretation has to be intertextual. When you look at the Quran in a general sense, you would find that passages in general, the Quran promotes universal peace. There is one classical passage which says, "Udkhulu fi silmi kafa," and some have translated it as "enter into Islam wholeheartedly." But as many commentators have pointed out, for example, if you look at the tafsir of Fakhruddin Razi, who was a rationalist, he would tell you that in this context, silm is not necessarily accurately translated as Islam, but could be understood as peace, enter into peace completely. The point I'm trying to say is that in a general sense, there is nothing that we find in the Quran which promotes killing, mass murder, or massacre of civilians, regardless of the situation. If people engage in wrongful action, which is clearly what they see, the aim is to be provoked, and then someone engages in wrongful action in the name of Islam, that also has to be condemned. You have to maintain the moral high standard, because the claim that we make is that this book is not a Muslim religious book, and it is not a Muslim holy book. It is not a book for Muslims. The Quran is not our holy book. The Quran is a book of guidance for humanity. And if it is a book of guidance for humanity, then it behoves that the message itself is positive, the message itself is uplifting. And when people engage in wrongful actions, it censures those wrongful actions, but it does not condone and sanction killing or mass murder for that particular matter, or execution-style killings, particularly when the background of the individuals are so flawed. I challenge anyone, and I've put out this debate. If you look at the advert for the mainstream press or religious leaders, Muslim or non-Muslim, to come and share the platform with us, we never got a response. I got one response on a Facebook page that responded to say, yes, Islam does inspire such killings. So I responded yesterday. It's part of a Facebook forum called Journalists of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I responded by inviting them. The person says they're too busy to come and attend, but they can easily make licentious statements. So coming back to the point I'm trying to emphasize is that when you look at the Quranic text, it talks about you have to look at the text and you have to look at the context. Jihad, for example, does not necessarily mean the physical effort to exert, does not necessarily mean holy war, but can be defined as a physical effort to exert, to be close to Allah, and thus achieve a harmonious society. Literally a struggle for righteousness. It could take speech, it could take communication, it could take armed struggle in certain contexts. But when you look at the text and the way in which jihad is used, it is used generically. I'll give you one example on this and then we'll move on. Everybody is familiar with Surah Luqman, correct? Some of you are Hufaz. And if you look at Surah Luqman, verse 15, so it'll be chapter 31, verse 15 of the Quran, speaks about Luqman and the advice and wisdom bestowed on him. But if you look at Surah Luqman verse 15, it says, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ حَمَلَتْهُ أُمُّهُ وَحْنًا عَلَى وَحْنٍ وَفِصَالُهُ فِي عَامَيْنِ أَنِ اشْكُرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيْكَ إِلَيَّ الْمَصِيرُ. We have enjoined on man to be good to his parents, in travail upon travail that his mother bear him, and show gratitude to your parents, to paraphrase what the Quranic verse says. In the next verse it says, verse 15, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِي مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٌ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا وَاتَّبِعْ سَبِيلَ مَنْ أَنَابَ إِلَيَّ ثُمَّ إِلَيَّ مَرْجِعُكُمْ فَأُنَبِّئُكُم بِمَا كُنتُمْ تَعْمَلُونَ. Now it speaks about that if your non-Muslim parents, if they engage in jahadaka, if they engage in jihad, I'm pointing out the generic usage of the term jihad. You fight in the path of Allah and those who fight in the path of shaitan. Jihad fi sabilillah and jihad fi shaitan. You're fighting in the path of shaitan. But if they strive, if they engage in jihad to make thee to commit shirk, then obey them not in terms of shirk, but bear them good company. You treat them well in this life and in the hereafter. In the end, the way of those who turn to me in love, in the end the return of all of you is to me. The point I'm trying to emphasize is that in this context, jihad is used generically. So to translate it as holy war in Arabic is what? Al-Harb al-Muqaddasatu. Does that particular passage, does that term exist in Arabic terminology? Does it exist in the Quran? Al-Harb al-Muqaddasatu, or Muqaddasatu al-Harb, the holy war. Does it exist? Does it even exist in the prophetic traditions? In the hadith? Obviously the answer is clear. This term is a Christian term. It was used in the Crusades when Pope Urban II in 1095 instructed the Crusaders to go engage in holy war in Jerusalem and massacre men, women and children of the Muslims and the Jews, and they massacred hundreds of thousands of people. It was the magnanimity of Salahuddin Ayyubi who showed the Christian Crusaders the higher standard in terms of which he operated it on, which was based on the Quranic text as opposed to what they believed in, which was based on something else entirely. So can you see the higher standard, the higher moral ground that we need to operate on? I don't know who these particular individuals are. We don't know what their background is. We don't know what their term is. But if they want to justify their actions, then I'm trying to say, and I'm saying to people out there, come here and debate. Present your case. Present your case and tell me I am wrong. And this is a challenge I'm putting out to Christian missionaries out there, because on the Answering Muslims website and the Answering Islam website, they show these shootings and then they give you Surah 9 verse 29, Surah 9 verse 5, Surah 8 verse 60, Surah 47 verse 4. They give you and they say, look, here is a link. Muslims are doing this because this is what they're teaching. So these people here, were they mufassirin? Or were they agent provocateurs being used by intelligence for a particular agenda to perhaps create mass publicity, provoke the masses of Muslims, and engage in more and more exploitation and curtailing of civil liberties of the masses? You know, right now in France, after this, when people were even speaking out and condemning the cartoons, and rightfully, you have a right to do that, some of them were being arrested. So where's the freedom of expression there? Because they claimed that they were sympathizing with the terrorists. Get things clear. If we do not support the terrorists, or we do not support killers, it doesn't mean that you de facto support the publication of Charlie Hebdo. You cannot juxtapose the two together. If I were to respond or react to Charlie Hebdo, I would invite the cartoonists to a debate. Let's debate the limits of free speech. Let's debate the limits of freedom of expression. Let me show you the duplicitous double standard. You talk about free speech, but why is your free speech and freedom of expression insulting? This is not free speech, what we saw. It's freedom to insult. But even if they insult, and even if they abuse you, You don't have a right to take the law into your own hands and claim that what you're doing is Islamic. You see, in the Quran, people said during the time of the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam that this book is contradictory. It contradicts itself. Did Allah give the Nabi a revelation to say, because that's what they said, you have to kill them? What does the Quran say? It says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَلَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Do they not consider the Quran with care? Then had it been therein many contradictions, it would cease to be the word of Allah. So go ahead, find it. You want to challenge it, find it. We allow freedom of expression in Islam, but we allow it in limits. We had at the largest masajid, once upon a time, not anymore, in the Jummah Masjid, someone who was speaking out and critiquing the Quran, challenging the authenticity of the Quran. Obviously, we provided a response to that. Does he have a right to do that? Yes. So if someone now is claiming that Islam doesn't allow freedom of expression and freedom of speech, it allows you to engage, to critique intellectually, but within certain limits. You can't abuse someone's mother, someone's sister, someone's daughter. In Western society, defamation laws are limited to those who are living. In Islam, we extend it to those who are dead. That is the superior moral standard that we have, that you defend the integrity and the right of people who have passed on. But in doing such, you have to maintain certain boundaries and certain limits. If people obviously go beyond the boundaries, we need to challenge them, correct them, and educate them. Because a lot of what they believe and say and do is characterized by ignorance. They have not read the Quranic text. They have not had a proper exposure to Islam. So what are we doing to basically engage and teach them what it basically means and what it promotes? We look at Surah Baqarah chapter 2 verse 256. La ikraha fid din, qad tabayyana ar-rushd min al-ghayy. Let there be no compulsion in ways of life. And I put in parenthesis expressive thought, for truth stands out distinct from falsehood. Meaning, if you want to ridicule and mock and challenge the authenticity of Islam, you can do it for all you care. It doesn't bother us. It shouldn't provoke us. But be prepared to justify your position. Justify it. If you cannot provide a justification, then you're a straw man. You create a straw man for yourself. And that's the point that we need to do in challenging Western society. Some people, and I'm not going to focus too much on this, but let's look at fighting in Islam and the role to fight. In Surah 22, verses 39 to 40, you read here, permission is only given to those on whom war is being waged or under attack because they are oppressed. And surely Allah is able to assist them, those who are driven from their homes without a just cause, except that they say, our Lord is God. And if Allah did not repel some people with others, then we would find cloisters, churches, synagogues, and mosques in which God's name, in a conventional sense, is much remembered, would be destroyed. So the point is that in this context, fighting is fighting to preserve our rights, fighting for the oppressed, and also fighting for and on behalf of the rights of others, even if their beliefs are false. Because there are certain implications. When the Prophet ﷺ entertained the Christians from Najran, did he compromise on religion? Did he compromise on belief? Not at all. Did they debate with him in the masjid? Yes, for 3 days. Did that, in a way, basically lead him to any foul form of oppression towards him? Absolutely not. So freedom of speech and expression is allowed within certain boundaries within the Islamic diaspora, but it's our duty to convey the truth to others. So if someone believes in falsehood, he has a right to believe in falsehood. Truth stands out distinct from falsehood. Our duty is ud'u ila sabili rabbika bil hikmah wal mau'izati al hasanati wajadilhum billati ahsan. Jazakallahu khair. In Surah 16 verse 125. Or qul ya ahl al kitab تعالوا إلى كلمة سواء بيننا وبينكم وقل يا أهل الكتاب لا تغلوا في دينكم ولا تقولوا لله إلا الحق, and so on and so forth. You engage, you reason, you question, you challenge, you educate them. That is a continuous process. But if we're not going to do that, if we're going to have a siege mentality, then how are we going to basically share the message of Islam? This should be viewed as an opportunity to educate them about the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But how many of us are basically doing that? This was the first verse in the Quran which related to defensive fighting for the oppressed. In Surah 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 190. You see, when these cartoons were being published, the Answering Muslims website and many other websites cited these verses of the Quran, but they cited it badly. They cited it badly. For example, they would quote, وَقَاتِلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, fight in the cause of Allah. And that now gives an indication, go fight. Fight anyone and everyone, fight and kill. And this is what the cartoonists were doing. But look at the verse. وَقَاتِلُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ الَّذِينَ يُقَاتِلُونَكُمْ وَلَا تَعْتَدُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ. Fight in the cause of Allah those who fight against you, but be not aggressors, as Allah loves not the aggressors. And then it goes on to say in verse 192, فَإِنِ انْتَهَوْا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. But if they cease from their aggression, Allah is of forgiving, most merciful. So the point is that the fighting in Islam is the physical fighting against aggression, against hostility, against warfare being engaged against you. Now this is not taken out of context, because if it is taken out of context, then I challenge those missionaries out there and those propagandists to come and provide the context for us. Surah 4 verse 75. Why should you not fight in the cause of Allah and of the utterly oppressed, men, women and children who are crying, our sustainer, lead us forth to freedom out of the land, whose people are tyrants, and raise for us out of thy grace one who will bring us succor, one who will give us liberation. Here you find that the fighting is basically for the liberation of humanity from tyrants. So for a non-Muslim to claim that we just simply fight for the sake of fighting is wrong. There is an objective. It's not even a moot point in Islam. There is no debate on this particular issue in Islam. The verses are clear and explicit. What I would call is the cut and paste syndrome. Like Surah 2 verse 190, Surah 8 verse 60, Surah 9 verse 5, Surah 9 verse 29, Surah 47 verse 3, cut the heads off of the infidels. Now if you were to look at this, what would it give you the indication? It would give the indication that it's violent, it's militant, it's aggressive, it's out there to challenge and destroy and exterminate and massacre and murder. And in propagandist websites on the internet, online, and in right-wing publications like Fox News, you know, in the West today too, you have left-wing news outlets and right-wing. Right-wing are things like Fox News, Sun TV, MSNBC. Your leftists are things like CNN, which purport to give the indication that it is in fact liberal and broad and so on and so forth. But obviously they do it from a more, from the perspective of pretending that they're in fact on your side. But when you see actions committed, you would find inevitably that they would give the indication that these are the particular passages that Muslims can use to justify oppression. Now look at it from this perspective. And this is how we find the dichotomy in society. A non-Muslim propagandist, a non-Muslim ignoramus, a non-Muslim missionary would say that violence is intrinsic to Islam, and this is a justification that they give, right? A Muslim, on the other hand, who would want to engage in acts of violence would say that violence is intrinsic to Islam, or violence is allowed in Islam, and this is a justification that they give. So what you see here is an alignment which raises a question. If the enemies of Islam are saying that acts of violence, and Islam is a violent religion, and they point to certain verses but they do it badly, and a person who claims to be a Muslim would say the same thing, then where does it place him? It places them both in the same camp. Because if your enemy has the same beliefs that you have, then where does it place you? It doesn't place you with the majority consensus of the classical mufassirin, or with the vast majority of Muslims who have a particular point. If I were to say, go and kill Shafat, and someone spreads it, what would it give the indication? That I'm commanding someone to say, go and kill Shafat. But if I were to say, go and kill Shafat, if he brings a machine gun and is about to machine down all the members of the audience, there is a context behind what I said. Does that make sense? Text, context. So fight the unbelievers. That's text. Context is fight unbelievers who fight against you, who commit aggression against you. Slay the unbelievers, again, that's a text. Yes. Context is slay the unbelievers who basically broke away from the treaty of peace against you, engaged in aggression against you, and took the first about being plotting to expel the apostle of Allah. Can you see? Context. Cut the heads of the infidels or unbelievers would seem to indicate that whenever you meet an unbeliever, you cut off his head. Context in Surah 47 verse 3 means when you meet the unbelievers who engage in aggression against you in harb, in warfare, then you smite at their necks. Context, because it says you cannot fight war with kid gloves. Now the question I need to ask is, why is it, and you know, this is going to be broadcast on YouTube, so people out there are going to see it, why is it that those who want to take these positions cannot justify their positions? Why? You see, in 2012, I did a debate with Jay Smith in Cape Town, where we focused on the issue of peace and violence, the biblical and Quranic approach to peace and violence. We're trying to have another engagement now with a writer from leading Christian magazine, Joy magazine, Peter Hammond, on the same issue of peace and violence. We've put out the challenge to him. We're still waiting for a response. He says in principle he's willing to debate, but he hasn't given any form of committal. In 2012, Jay spoke for the first 40 minutes. I responded. He quoted these passages, and then I provided a response. In the rebuttal session, I challenged him to reply to what he had said and what I responded to him. He never mentioned a single passage again. But then in 2014, last year, in Toronto, in another debate that he had with Shabir Ali, he brings the same verses again. So can you see that there is an agenda at hand? There is an agenda by people here who are out to make mischief. And the point is that we as Muslims need to break down this propaganda and the stereotypes that are basically being portrayed. But we do this in a peaceful manner, and we do not do this through means of violence or sanguinary warfare. That is a challenge that we need to do. I'll give you a classic example. This is in a chapter called Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 29. And here it says, قَاتِلُوا الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَلَا بِالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَلَا يُحَرِّمُونَ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولَهُ وَلَا يَدِينُونَ دِينَ الْحَقِّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ حَتَّى يُعْطُوا الْجِزْيَةَ أَيَّدٍ وَهُمْ صَاغِرُونَ. In Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 29. And the verse simply says, fight those who do not believe in Allah or in the last day, or who do not consider unlawful what Allah and His Messenger have made, and who do not acknowledge the religion of Allah, from those who they were given the scripture, meaning the people of the book, until they give the tribute willingly, whilst they feel themselves subdued. Now, this is viewed as a passage or as a verse which is utilized to say Muslims are now authorized to fight against those of the people of the book. But what is the context? If we look at something called the Asbabul Nuzul, or the background to the particular passage or verse itself. We look at Tafsir al-Tabari, quoting Mujahid, reported concerning the verse, "Fight those who do not believe in Allah in the last day," that it was revealed when Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions were commanded with the expedition of Tabuk. So in that context, this appears to be an open-ended command to fight non-Muslims until they are conquered. But there is a fundamental principle in Quranic exegesis, in Quranic tafsir, is that the verses must also be understood not just in the context of the verses, but in the context in which they are revealed, the asbab al-nuzul, and in conjunction with other verses delineating the rules of warfare. Now, the expedition of Tabuk dealt with what? It was preceded by a battle called the Battle of Mu'ta, which began when an emissary of the Prophet was assassinated whilst delivering a letter to a Roman ally. When you look at the fact that this verse refers to the people of the book, which people of the book was it referring to? It was referring to the East Roman Empire, which was Christian. You see, we're not dealing with individual Christian communities here. We were dealing with the Byzantine Empire. The Roman Empire was arguably one of the most brutal dictatorships that ever existed. There was a crude movie, I never saw the entire thing, which was apparently produced in 1980 called Caligula. Apparently Peter O'Toole and a lot of these leading actors acted into it, but they subsequently disassociated because they never saw that the level of brutality and nudity and sex that this individual was going to portray on the Roman Empire. But it goes to give you the indication in terms of what the Muslim armies were dealing with and what the Muslim community were facing with. So in that context, the Byzantine Empire was considered one of the most mightiest military forces at that time. And it showed an unjustifiable opposition to the Muslims. In that context, when the emissary of the Prophet was going to deliver a letter and the message of Islam to the Romans, he was subsequently assassinated. The assassination of Al-Harith ibn Umair al-Azdi by this individual here, the ambassador was carrying the message from the Prophet to the ruler of Basra, and although the Muslim forces could not have revenge on those tyrants, the confrontation itself had a great impression. So Surah 9 verse 29, at the outset, whilst it seems to indicate and appear to fight in a general sense, was revealed in the context during the time of the expedition of Tabuk. And so it's important that when you look at that, and when you look at the background, that we were dealing with a brutal Roman Empire there that wanted to engage in mass extermination. The Muslims had the right to confront this power and engage in warfare against them. But it was not a commandment to fight innocent monks and children and people from Christian communities and so on. It was dealing with an empire. So again, look at the context. What about Surah 9? Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9, verse 5. This passage has actually become arguably one of my favorite verses. And I'd like to introduce this passage for dawah purposes because of the fact that it gives you an opportunity to convey the message. It gives you an opportunity to portray the message. In Surah 9 verse 5 it says, "When the forbidden months are past, fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them. Seize them, beleaguer them, lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. But if they repent, establish prayer and give charity, let them go their way. Verily Allah is forgiving, most merciful." Now looking at this verse, and I'm putting out the challenge to people out there. No person out there can justifiably utilize this verse in explaining any form of act of violence. In fact, this verse itself and the surrounding verses point you towards a direction of peace. Even though it purports to say fight and slay, and I will show you why. So for someone to say that this passage speaks about killing and slaying the unbelievers, you need to back yourself up. Look at the context. Surah 9 discusses a peace treaty engaged between Muslims and the pagans. بَرَاءَةٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ إِلَى الَّذِينَ عَاهَدتُّم مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. There was a peace treaty that was engaged between the Muslims and the pagans. After a while, the pagans were repeatedly breaking this peace treaty. And so what the Quran says at the outset of the surah, that as of now on, there is a declaration of immunity. These people are not fulfilling the terms and conditions of the treaty. Why must you now fulfill the terms and conditions of this particular peace treaty? Of the pagans, two tribes, the Bani Damra and the Bani Kanana, adhered to their particular treaties. Meaning they fulfill their specific treaties, they fulfill their engagements. But the rest did not fulfill it. Now, there were two exceptions. Those pagans who did not fulfill the treaty, what did they do? They are engaging in what is mentioned in Surah 9, verse 13. Will you not fight people who broke their oaths, aimed at the expulsion of the Prophet, attacked you first? And I'll read it out in Arabic. أَلَا تُقَاتِلُونَ قَوْمًا نَكَثُوا أَيْمَانَهُمْ وَهَمُّوا بِإِخْرَاجِ الرَّسُولِ وَهُمْ بَدَؤُوكُمْ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ أَتَخْشَوْنَهُمْ فَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَوْهُ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Will you not fight people who broke their oaths? That's a peace treaty. Aimed at the expulsion of the Prophet, attacked you first. Do you fear them? But Allah has more right that you be feared. So those were the aggravating factors in breaking the treaty, meaning that they attacked you first. In attacking you first, what do? They broke the treaty. Then you basically do what it's mentioned, that when the sacred months are passed, slay the unbelievers or slay the mushrikeen, wherever you find them, capture them, besiege them, and lie in wait for them. But against who? Against those who in Surah 9, verse 13, attacked you first, expelled the Prophet, and broke their oaths against you. They respect neither ties of relationship nor keep their covenants in your case. But there were exceptions to that. The pagans like the Bani Damra and the Bani Kanana who remain true to their obligations, you are to remain true to your obligations as well. So for example, it says here in Surah 9, verse 4, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ عَهَدتُّم مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَنْقُصُوكُمْ شَيْءًا وَلَمْ يُظَاهِرُوا عَلَيْكُمْ أَحَدًا فَأَتِمُّوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَحْدَهُمْ إِلَى مُدَّتِهِمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُتَّقِينَ. That those treaties that are not dissolved with those pagans whom you have entered into an alliance and who have not fought against you and have not failed you, then you are to fulfill your engagements and your terms with them. Fulfill it to the end. But those who did not fulfill their terms and took against you and took the challenge to fight you, then you fight them. But even in that context, it doesn't stop there. If these people fight you, you are to fight them. But in Surah 5, verse 6, it says, amongst those who fight you, وَإِنْ أَحَدٌ مِّنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ تَجَارَكَ فَأَجِرْهُ حَتَّى يَسْمَعَ كَلَامَ اللَّهِ ثُمَّ أَبْلِغْهُ مَأْمَنَهُ ذَلِكَ بِأَنْهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. If any one of the pagans amongst the mushrikeen who violated their treaty previously, fought against you, if they ask you for asylum in times of war, then you grant it to them. And not only that, you escort him to a place where he is to be secure. Look what it says here. This is a translation by George Sale. He was a biased translator. He says, if any of the pagans, that is those who broke the treaty against you, seek your protection, protect him till he hears the word of Allah, till he hears the word of God. Then convey him to a secure environment. This is because they are people who know not. And it says, you shall give him safe conduct that he may return home securely, in case he shall not think fit to embrace Mohammedanism, which means Islam. This was the old, classical 18th century translation, which was biased. But here it says that if they do not even accept Islam, let him hear the word of God. This is because they are men of knowledge, men of no knowledge. So can you see the context of Surah 9 verse 5 now? Now does it make sense? So those people who say it means to fight and kill everybody, can you see the context now? Can you see the violations? The violation and the challenge to fight is against certain people, certain of the mushrikeen who violated their treaties, took the oath by being aggressive against you, expelled the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and so on and so forth. There is a context, and we need to discuss the context behind that. Surah 47, verse 4. Surah 47 says that when you meet those in battle, or when you meet the unbelievers, slay them. But the context of Surah 47, verse 4, I'll just paraphrase the passage. We can look at Surah Muhammad, verse 4. It says, when you meet in battle those who reject faith, then smite at their necks. Then when you have overcome them, meaning when you have subdued them, make them prisoners, and afterwards, in parenthesis, set them free as a favor or for ransom till the war lays down its burden. So it's again speaking of the context of war. So any form of fighting, aggressive warfare, or armed struggle in Islam has to be viewed in a particular context. And it has to be declared by someone, a righteous imam, a properly guided and righteous imam. Not by anyone, not by Baghdadi. We don't even know the background of Baghdadi. If you know the background of Baghdadi, even his background is dubious. Why is it that there's talks? There was a release by Edward Snowden, the journalist, in 2012, which goes on to say that Baghdadi had, in certain instances, links with Mossad. Now, how does this make sense? Why would someone who purports to be part of an Islamic movement have an alliance with Mossad or with the intelligence community in Israel? Why is it that groups in Syria that are fighting, like the Al-Nusra Brigade, and other groups like the Free Syrian Army against Assad, which is a dictatorship, have support by Britain, the United Kingdom, and Israel? What's the motivation? What's the significance there? Why is it that these groups, if you're talking about engaging in true struggle, groups like Al-Qaeda and so on, why is it not once have they attacked Israel? Not once. Not once have they attacked the brutality that is happening in Gaza and the West Bank perpetrated by Israel. Does it not raise questions? I mean, the attack against the Yazidis, many of them were innocent children. They have a different belief system. Some of them say they believe in the devil or they believe in the evil, dark forces. A lot of them that you see that are being removed are children. This begs the question, who is arming them? Who is backing them? And when will Muslims wake up and see, as many political analysts have pointed out, that the so-called black and white world that we purport to see is in fact not the same? You take a classical example in Libya or in Mali. The West was fighting the war against Al-Qaeda in Africa, in Mali, in Timbuktu. But those same individuals were allied with so-called freedom fighters who were fighting against Libya and deposed Gaddafi. And back then they were supported and backed. So they were supported in Libya, they were armed, and in Mali they were being fought against. In Syria, the Al-Nusra Brigade and other such groups were backed and supported by Western governments. They were given finance, they were given armaments, they were supported. But the same alliances that they have with ISIS, you know, it's actually called ISIL, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, as opposed to Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, because they are moved in this vast arena and vast area out there. The point I'm trying to emphasize is that when you see violence being committed in the world today, don't always adopt positions and think that these are Muslims fighting in the name of Islam. Sometimes there are people purportedly acting in the name of Islam, but are financed and backed and supported by the same people that you purportedly view as your enemies. So it's time for us to move away from the siege mentality. These people don't have our interests at heart. Imperial power does not have our interests at heart. Satire and ridicule and freedom of expression, when used against authority, is a powerful tool. And Muslim youth need to stop hearing what people purportedly say about them or say about their particular faith or challenge them to do this. In any crime, in any crime, brothers. I'm living in one of the most beautiful country towns in South Africa. But the level of crime that you see is absolutely shocking and appalling. The question we always ask as litigators and as people of law is that in any crime that is being committed, who benefits? If these people were purportedly acting in the name of Islam, did it benefit Muslim? Did Charlie Hebdo resist from publications? Or did they increase their circulation? Has the image of Islam become far more good or far more worse after these particular killings that basically took place? And so the point I want to emphasize at the end of the day is that read the Quran and maintain an interpretative relationship with the text of the Quran. The only way you can make the Quran a living reality is if we have a connection with the book. If there is no connection with the book, and we read it superficially and purely for the purposes of just fulfilling what we believe to be our religious duty, then we defeat the purpose. I just want to leave you with this.
إن الحمد لله الذي نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ به من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله أرسله الله تعالى بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا فصلى الله عليه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا ثم أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وإن كل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. يقول سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أن أقول أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ربنا لا تجعلنا فتنة للذين كفروا واغفر لنا ربنا إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي آمين يا رب العالمين. Inshallah, in today's khutbah, what I'd like to share with you are some reflections from the Quran, but inspired really by the events, the tragic events that have taken place in France and apparently in the news today continue to take place. These kinds of things, every time they come in the news, the Muslim mind almost freezes up. We get paralyzed. How are we supposed to respond to this? We are barely done dealing with one tragedy and another one hits in the news and another one and another one. And they are of different kinds. Sometimes these are events in which some things are done to Muslims, and other cases where Muslims have done some things to others. And in both cases, we are left completely baffled as to what an intelligent response is supposed to be, or how we're supposed to deal with this, not only as individuals, but also as a community, and in a larger sense, as an ummah. The first thing I want to start, I really have basically 4 or 5 things to share with you today, inshallah, and I hope, despite the frustration that you and I both feel about what is going on, that I hope that I'm able to be, coherent and consistent in the ideas that I want to present before you. The first thing that I want to share with you is just a statement of fact. Criminals are criminals. It doesn't matter what religion they have. When someone's a murderer and they murder someone who didn't deserve to be killed, it does not matter that they're Muslim or Christian or Jewish or atheist. They are equal before the law and they're equal before the eyes of the Muslims. Just because someone commits a crime and they are a Muslim, they are not any less guilty in my eyes or your eyes. That is not the case. Don't confuse the fact that إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةً, all believers are brothers, that should somehow confuse your sense of justice. Actually, Allah Azza wa Jalla in the Quran very, very clearly tells us to stand by justice وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. Even if standing by justice means you have to stand against your own selves. When Muslims have done something wrong, then it is something wrong, and you cannot hide around it. You cannot beat around the bush. And the easy cop-out for a lot of people when it comes to justice is they confuse justice with retaliation. Justice with retaliation. And what I mean by that is, when someone does something wrong, I'll give you a childish example so this point becomes clear. When one of your kids does something wrong, and you tell them you've done this wrong, and they say, well, my brother did it. Well, he did it too. You know what? Anybody else doing something wrong does not justify your crime. You are responsible for your crime. And you cannot deflect and say, well, what about them? No, 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 no. We'll deal with them separately. That's a separate problem. Don't confuse their problem with what you've done. You know? So alaykum ma humiltum. You have to carry your own burden, what you've been loaded on with. Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't allow us to take credit for other people's work. And Allah Azza wa Jal doesn't allow us to justify our misbehavior given other people's misbehavior. He doesn't allow us to do it. لَهَا مَا كَسَبَتْ وَلَكُمْ مَا كَسَبْتُمْ. They have what they earned and you have what you earned. That's the first point that I wanted to make. The second is that these people, they are in fact an embarrassment. People that, in the name of Islam or Muslims, when they commit heinous acts, and they are an embarrassment to the Muslim community, but they are more than that. We are embarrassed and we are humiliated by what's happened. There's no way around it. And yes, I am not a criminal. I haven't done anything. But I do share something with them. These people are Muslim, or at least they claim to be. Right? And they're apparently done in the name of Islam, or whatever it may be. So long as that claim is there, I have something in common with them, at least a word. At least a word. And that enough is a humiliation. So now I want to address what does that mean for you and me. The first and foremost, we need to understand something. We have to take collective responsibility. And that'll be the last part that I talk about in my khutbah today. What does it mean to take collective responsibility? The ummah is in chaos, and every single member, every single citizen of this ummah, his and her responsibility is to do something to undo that chaos. We have to do whatever we can in our capacity. Yes, we cannot get rid of chaos in the world. And we cannot get rid of fanaticism and craziness. We can't get rid of it. But we at least have the responsibility to do our part, at least our part. But know one thing for sure. One of the things that's spreading the chaos and helping further this craziness is that in the minds of some Muslims, these people are actually somehow justified. Somehow what they did must be in some sense Islamic. And I want to just tell you unequivocally, without any confusion or any shadow of a doubt, I've been trying to understand this deen for well over a decade now, and I have no doubts or no confusion in my mind. There's nothing Islamic about any of this. There's nothing even close to Islamic about any of this. As a matter of fact, I personally give you the advice, and I give my children the advice, and I give my friends the advice. Don't watch those cartoons or those YouTube videos or those disparaging comments or read those books. I don't ask you to read that stuff. I don't even want you to look at it because it's not worth your time. It's not worth it. But I will tell you one thing. As offensive as those cartoons may be, it is equally offensive to do something in the Prophet's name, in Islam's name, in Allah's name, subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is against the teachings of Islam. It is equally offensive. When they are spreading filthy propaganda against Islam by insulting the religion, you're spreading another kind of propaganda against Islam by spreading hate and killing and injustice and calling that the deen of Allah. That is also a crime, and we are equally offended by that too. That is a crime in and of itself. This is the second point that I wanted to bring to your attention. They have no justification. Some people like to quote the example of Ka'ab bin Ashraf, who was a famous poet at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, half Arab and half Jewish, who was actually he had extreme animosity towards the Prophet of Allah ﷺ. As a matter of fact, there are a number of occasions where he tried to corner Muslims and convince them to do exactly the opposite of what Allah would want them to do, or what the Messenger would want them to do ﷺ. And ayat came specifically about his conversations on multiple occasions. And this guy is so bad that his poison drew the attention of Allah Azza wa Jalla, and ayat came responding to him. He's no ordinary enemy of Islam. And some people confuse his story because he was also a poet. And he made filthy poetry about the Muslim women, by name. He would make filthy poetry about Muslim women by name. Not just poetry against the Prophet ﷺ, which is bad enough. But on top of that, the women of the Muslims. Now you and I imagine if somebody made dirty poetry about my daughter, about my sister, about my mother, how would we respond? And and then some people confuse his story and say, well, it's because he made this poetry that the Prophet ﷺ said, Man li bi Ka'ab, who's going to get rid of Ka'ab for me? And then, a Sahabi got up, and then he was finally killed. He was actually executed. It's because he made poetry. See, now we have justification that you don't have. You can just say whatever you want. This person made poetry, and the Prophet ﷺ commanded that he should be killed. Hold on a second. This is the same man who actually attempted to kill the Messenger of Allah ﷺ by poisoning his food. And as a matter of fact, even the final attempt, the idea of poisoning the food of the Prophet ﷺ came from him. And there are multiple occasions on which he has made attempts to assassinate the Messenger of Allah ﷺ, including a secret conspiracy he had with Abu Sufyan before he became Muslim. Right after the loss of Badr, he met and had secret counsel with Abu Sufyan, among other instances. So to take all of his career and all of his animosity against the Messenger of Allah, and by the way, when he's living in Medina, and he's attempting to kill the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam by any means, then you know what that means? That means he attempted to assassinate the president. That is what you consider an enemy of the state. And then the penalty for that is death. In any state. And to confuse that with this guy made poetry, that's why we have to kill him. And therefore anybody who says anything about Islam, anything about the Prophet ﷺ, anything about the Quran, we need to kill them. This is craziness. And not only that, that's one story, but this actually, interestingly, is an insight into how limited the thought process of the Muslim has become. Because the Quran and the legacy of all prophets is so huge, but you want to take one story, which you don't even fully understand, but use that to decide whether you can take someone's life. The entire legacy of prophets is of them being made fun of. Messengers have been made fun of before you. When Allah says they were made fun of, that must not be a small joke. There must be some disgusting things being said about messengers. Muslims have been made fun of before. Yasumunakum. They would blacken your faces. The expression in the Arabic suggesting one of the worst kinds of insults being hurled towards someone. وَلَتَسْمَعُنَّ مِنَ الَّذِينَ أُوتُوا الْكِتَابَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ وَمِنَ الَّذِينَ أَشْرَكُوا أَذًى كَثِيرًا. You're going to get to hear a lot of painful things from the people of the book and the people that have done shirk. They're going to say some hurtful things towards you. And what is Allah's response? And by the way, that ayah in Ali Imran is after the battle of Uhud. And you're going to hear horrible things coming from them. You're going to hear insightful, hateful, ugly, disgusting speech coming from them. What should you do? Kill anyone who speaks out? No. وَلَئِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا. If you could respond with sabr, and you could have taqwa. So we're easy to ignore the entire Quran, the entire legacy of all prophets, alayhimu salatu wassalam, including our own Messenger, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, who was insulted and cursed to his face on multiple occasions, with him not losing the smile on his face, alayhi salatu wasalam. Let's forget all of that. All of that is mansukh because I want to kill someone. This is stupidity and it's an insult against Islam. So I'm not talking to non-Muslims today, I'm just talking to Muslims. If you have the bug in your head that somehow what they did was Islamic, please get it out of your system and maybe spend some time learning the book of Allah. Spend some time learning the seerah of this Messenger ﷺ on whose behalf you speak. Because you clearly don't know who this man is that you're standing to defend. And you don't know what it means to defend him, alayhi salatu wassalam. The first point was criminals are just criminals, no matter what. And even if they pretend to come up with religious justification, it changes nothing. It changes nothing. This is not a debate in Islamic studies. It's a non-point. It's a moot point. There's no argument to be had. The third point that I want to make is that in fact, speech, hateful speech, condescending speech, insulting speech, speech made against our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, cartoons made about him or videos made about him, or things said about the Quran, these things are offensive. And any people, including Muslims, when they are insulted, when things that they hold sacred are insulted, they have a right to be offended. They have a right to be insulted. That is part of our dignity. If it didn't hurt our feelings, it would mean we have no dignity. That somebody can say something about my mother, someone can say something about my father, someone can say something about my messenger, ﷺ, and it doesn't affect me at all? No, it affects me. It offends me. It angers me. I have a right to be angry, but those are two separate issues. And so what's happening in the media now is these two are being made into one issue. In other words, we are against those people being killed unjustifiably, and therefore we are for free speech. So all of it should be celebrated. We are with them no matter what. No, 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 no. For the Muslim, it's not that simple. These are two separate things. We are against people who are killed unjustifiably, and we stand against those who killed them unjustifiably, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. But at the same time, we have a right, and we will continue to have the right, to be offended by that kind of ignorant and hateful speech. And we will speak out against it, and we will stand against it. There's a way to do it. There's a way to do it, but we're not going to pretend that all free speech is lovely and we're supposed to be able to accept it. No, is Allah angered by the words of people in the Quran? Absolutely. Are the people, I just mentioned the ayah to you, the believers are going to be hurt by the words of other people. The issue isn't whether we have a right to be offended or not. We do. The issue is, how do you respond? How do you react? And that reaction determines everything, because our reaction to all things has to submit to the guidance of Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is those feelings themselves. Those feelings are justifiable. But what happens after those feelings, that may not be justifiable. That's where the problem lies. The final point that I want to bring to your attention in this khutbah is actually something that I personally feel we don't talk about enough. And I think that's the real problem. That's the real point. And the real point is, why do people make fun of Islam? Why do they make fun of it anyway? Why do they insult it? Why are these cartoons being made? Why is there so much propaganda and so much hate speech towards Muslims, even justified as journalism nowadays, masked as, editorial columns? Pieces about, and the framing has become more and more interesting. So it used to be radical Islam, right? So they talked about radical Islam. And they talked about Islam that these fanatics believe in some crazy militant version of Islam where they just want to kill everyone and all this stuff. And they want to, put women in garbage bags and all this stuff. But further down the line, the definition of radical has loosened up to the point where if you pray 5 times, now you're pretty radical. So now, radical used to be really crazy, but now they're saying anything that, if you can show Islam, if you look even Muslim too much, if a woman's wearing a hijab, she must be a radical Muslim. If a guy's got a beard, he must be a radical Muslim. We don't have it that bad in the United States, but in Europe, it is pretty bad. And I've been to Europe, and I can tell you, it is pretty bad. It is pretty bad. It is seen as very radical. But the question is, why? We have this mentality, the Muslims have developed this mindset, they're out to get us, man. These kuffar, man, they hate us. They keep making these cartoons against us. They keep doing this propaganda against us. They hate everything about Islam. They're coming after this, that, the other. They. We don't have any time to look in the mirror. The prophets, I told you, alayhim salatu wasalam, were also made fun of. I told you that. The Sahaba were also made fun of. وَيَسْخَرُونَ مِنَ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. It's in the Quran. They make fun of those who believed. The kuffar made fun of those who believed. It's in the Quran. But the fundamental question is, why were they made fun of? And why are we being made fun of? Is it the same thing? And I argue it is not. Those people were made fun of because that was one of the ways to shut down the work of Islam. One of the ways to stop Islam from spreading, because they didn't know what else to do. Islam was so thought-provoking. Islam was so eye-opening. Islam called for justice. It questioned injustices happening in that society. And people were gravitating, young people, old people were gravitating towards Islam. And they didn't know how to stop it. So they came out with the tactic of calling the messenger a liar, and that didn't work. Alayhi salatu wasalam. Maybe we can mock these people and just laugh them off so nobody thinks they're a big deal. That was one of their tactics, and when that didn't work, they resorted to other tactics. All of these tactics were there to stop Islam from spreading because it was too powerful. I don't argue that's the case with us. I argue the ridicule is being made of Islam because of how Muslims appear, what Muslims have become, how we carry ourselves, what our societies look like, what our streets look like in our neighborhoods, what our homes look like, what our businesses practice are like, what our governments are like. If you want to look at examples of corruption, if you want to look at the exact opposite of a civilized society, travel to the Muslim world, much of it. Hard for us to even be civilized in the parking lot of a masjid, for God's sake. The only time we're organized is when we have to be organized in sufuf, when salat is called. But outside of that, forget about it. Forget it. The worst kinds of just basic human decency we don't possess. We don't possess it. What is Muslim civilization? We love quoting our history. We love quoting when the Muslims were at the forefront of invention, when they were leading the universities of the world, when they were, people would come from all over the world to study ilm in Baghdad. And the Europeans had lost their literature and the Muslims had it. And they had to come to us to learn it. When Spain was a model for the world. We love quoting those things. What are you going to quote now? What have we done? What have we produced as a people? How have we contributed to the world? The only time we make it to the news is when we blow something up. Or when we're in some kind of chaos or another. This is, why wouldn't, look at it from the outside perspective. These people are crazy. These people are crazy. As a matter of fact, I'm not even going to point the finger at the Muslim world, the rest of the Ummah. Let's talk about Western Muslims for a moment. We come to these societies, and I've dealt with the Muslim community in the United States for quite some time. I've had decent interaction with the Muslim community in England and in Australia. But I will tell you something. The things you see among the Muslims, subhanallah. I know Muslim business owners that lie on their taxes. Yeah, but I don't want to pay the kafir. Really, you don't want to pay the kafir. You're selling beer. Your Islam didn't show up then, but all of a sudden your wala and bara showed up when you had to pay your taxes. These Muslims today, us, not these, us. We have such low moral standards. Such low moral standards. You have Muslim business owners that don't pay decent wages. They don't pay decent wages. They don't even give their wife their mahar. They're complaining about injustices in the world. They don't even have justice inside their home. Inside their home. Why would somebody want to be attracted to Islam? The ayah that I want to share with you today is one of the scariest ayat in the Quran when it comes to this ummah. رَبَّنَا لَا تَجْعَلْنَا فِتْنَةً لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Our Rabb, do not make us a fitna. Do not make us a tribulation for those who have disbelieved. In other words, one of the meanings of that ayah is, Ya Allah, don't make us so wretched and so embarrassing a people, so far from the actual beautiful teachings of Islam, that when non-Muslims see us, they say, why would I want anything to do with Islam? Why would I want to be Muslim? I want to be like these people? This is what I want to be like? They are not justified in them poking fun. But we're not justified when we refuse to look in the mirror. We're not justified. We have to start looking in the mirror. We have to fix this problem. And it's high time we stopped complaining about what the world is doing against us. We are the people of La ilaha illallah. We have on our side Allah Azza wa Jal. His help is greater than any problem. There is no problem big enough to not be able to be managed when you have Allah on your side. The problem is we don't want Allah's help. At least we don't care to earn it. It doesn't just show up for free. It has to be earned. There has to be a transformation that has to happen inside my house. It has to happen inside my family. It has to happen inside my neighborhood. We have lost our moral compass. And I'm not talking about advanced knowledge of deen and fiqh and sharia. I'm talking about basic morality, people. Basic morality. We'll have masajid in the United States and across the world even, where fundraising is taking place. And they're gonna collect money. And once they collect the money, they're gonna say, yeah, we should put this money towards this thing or the other. Well, no, you advertise that you're gonna raise these funds for this project, but now you're putting it in another. No, it's okay, we have a fatwa. You have a fatwa to be dishonest? Where'd you get that from? But that's okay, we could do that. We could lie even in the name of religion. We could lie, subhanallah. How could that be? How does it get to that point? How does it get to the point where you have to argue in your home? You have to argue with your parents, argue that, Dad, really seriously, I really think we should give zakat. No, it's okay. And there's an argument happening inside a Muslim home whether they should give zakat or not. This is happening inside the Muslim family. Why would Allah's help come to a people like that? That have been given the most beautiful deen. That have been given the most perfect teachings. And they don't even look in the mirror for 1 minute, for 1 day. Just, what am I doing wrong? Many of you are not ulama, you're not fuqaha, you're not muftis, you don't have to be. But you know what you do wrong. I know what I do wrong. And we keep overlooking it. Allah will not change the state of this people. You know, Allah will not change the state of this ummah. Nope, He will not do it. Allah Himself says, people say, oh, you just quote the ayat are the ultimate reality. There is no greater reality than the ayat. There is no reality you will find in physics and chemistry and biology that you will find in the ayat of the Quran. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Allah will not change the state of a people until they transform what is within their own selves. مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. There is something wrong inside of ourselves. Allah's answer to what is wrong with the ummah is something is wrong inside people. That is Allah's answer to what is wrong with this ummah today. When He says, وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. You are going to be in the supreme position if in fact you have true iman, if you're true believers. Now clearly we're not in the supreme position, so something must be wrong with iman. Because Allah is never wrong. Allah is just not wrong. This is a tragedy. One after another, after another, after another, and it's not going to stop, and we know it's not going to stop. We know it's not going to stop. The only thing we can do, instead of being overwhelmed by this flood of tragedy and constantly just figuring out a way to justify to somebody, you know, how we're not crazy. Because by the way, they're going to think we're crazy no matter what. You can't impress them. You could try. Messengers tried too. If messengers weren't good enough for them, we're definitely not good enough for them. Let me tell you. There's no way to impress them. No matter how we do right, the people who hate will always hate. The people who make fun will always make fun. But we better give them the right reasons to make fun of us. The right reasons are we stand by Islam. We are the people of reason. We are the people of intelligence. We are the people. The greatest threat of Islam was not its force. And this is, I promise this is my last point. The greatest threat of Islam was not its force. Was not the sword. Was not the weapon. The greatest threat of Islam was the power of its ideas and how it challenged injustice head on and how it questioned the integrity of other philosophies, other ideas. How can you think like that? How can you act like that? How can you judge like that? أَمْ لَكُمْ كِتَابٌ فِيهِ تَدْرُسُونَ أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ. Why don't you think? How do you make your decisions? This was the reason, this is a religion of أَدْعُوا إِلَى اللَّهِ عَلَى بَصِيرًا. I call to Allah with eyes open, a religion of thought. We are no longer a thoughtful people, so Islam is no longer. What we think the threat of Islam in the West, the threat of Islam is its militancy. The militancy is nothing. This is nothing. The real threat to the Quraysh were rattled, not at Badr, but back in Makkah. They were shaken up just by the ayat. The word of Allah was enough. It was enough to take a tradition that was there for thousands of years and it was rattled just by a few words of Allah. Just by a few words. Something's happened. We're not connected with that word anymore. You know, when somebody wants to win an argument, when two people have an argument, and you don't have a response, then you get angry. And you start yelling. And when you start yelling, it is proof that you lost. When you in an argument start yelling, it is proof that you lost because you don't have a reasonable answer left. And it frustrated you, so you got angry. And when two people have an argument and you lost and you hit the other, that is also proof that you lost. Because you could not defeat him with words, so you figured you could try to defeat him with your hand. This is actually indication that you're not strong enough in what you have to say. My argument to you is, our deen, Allah has given us words, there are no stronger words. There is no stronger message. We don't have to resort to anything else. And when we do, it is as though we are admitting that this isn't strong enough. But it is. We're not strong enough because we're not connected to this word enough. And we have to be the people that produce the most intellectual responses. The most reasonable responses. The ones that challenge the immorality of the world in the most profound and thought-provoking way. We're the ones that are supposed to engage in the most deep conversation with the agnostic, with the atheist, with the Christian, with all of them. With all of them. Their accusation against religion, you know what it is? It's been there for centuries in Europe now and now all over the world. Religious people are closed-minded. Religious people are fanatical. Religious people are intolerant. Religious people cannot take criticism. Religious people are not open to conversation. So if you get rid of religion, you'll have an open-minded society where people can think for themselves. This is their accusation. And you know what? It holds true for the Christendom that had invaded Europe for centuries. It was true. But the Islam that Allah gave His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the exact opposite of that. It is the religion that encourages dialogue. Hatu burhanakum in kuntum sadiqeen. Bring your evidences. Why don't you give me all of your criticisms against the Quran? I would invite you to bring all of your criticisms. How is a book asking people not just to have faith, but to please collect all of your criticisms and bring them? This is what you call open-mindedness. The book is calling to open-mindedness. We're the ones that are closed-minded. We're the ones. And we have to empower this ummah again by opening up our minds, by opening up this book and thinking the way it wants us to think. To show that religion is not a way to close the mind and close the eyes and close the hearts. It is the way to open the mind and to engage in dialogue and to bring civilization to humanity. They think the solution is when you get rid of religion. And we're saying the solution is when you bring the true religion. Yes, false religion will bring oppression. False religion will bring oppression. But when you bring the deen of Allah, it's a thing of beauty. If we don't show them that, who will? That's why Allah put you and me on this earth. To be members of this ummah is an honor. It's not a small thing. We are carrying collectively 1/5 of the ummah's population on our shoulders. The burden that was placed on the shoulders of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is what you and I carry every single day, whether we admit it or not. And when we don't do something about that burden and we don't show humanity what it is, we're in trouble. Not just with the authorities or with the media. We're in trouble with Allah. I pray that Allah Azza wa Jal makes us a people of Quran once again. That teaches us not just, that we learn to think the way Allah wants us to think. And that we are able to represent in our character, in our communities, in our business dealings, in our personal lives, in our speech, in our demeanor. We're able to depict what makes this deen so perfect, what makes it so beautiful. May Allah Azza wa Jal shine the light of this guidance into all of our hearts and keep it strong and make it stronger and stronger. And may Allah make the generation of young people real leaders for this community that are going to bring an age of light out of this age of darkness. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim.
You see, that's a point. Can you see the argument that is presented? That sometimes we don't engage in what we would call atomizing scripture. When you provide an atomistic interpretation to scripture, you distort. You become part and parcel of the problem. I want to end with this particular point. Within the Islamic worldview, there are certain concepts we've got, like ibadah, jihad, for example, khilafah, and so on. And ijtihad, ijma, qiyas, these are principles and tools that we utilize. And to just give you an example, ibadah, which somehow or the other we understand in a limited sense as ritualistic piety or ritualistic worship. But the deeper question is that when you look at it from the Islamic perspective, ibadah is multifaceted. What, for example, happens from the time I leave the IPCI and go to the masajid and make my salah, come back, or leave my house and go every day and go to the masjid and come back and do my work and do nothing and just go up and down on a daily basis. And then in your community around you, you see poverty, you see a sense of social injustice, you see pollution, you see hatred, you see warfare, you see deprivation. What is your role? Because part of the spiritual quest in Islam is to also concern oneself with regards to the environment. Part of the spiritual quest is to confront the injustices that we see in society and at the same time that we see in our community. Our communities, unfortunately, are closed. Racism is rampant in our communities as well. There are certain issues that are taboo to discuss. If we want to keep closed societies, if we want to be insular, if we do not want to basically emulate the prophetic tradition and the sunnah and basically implement Quranic teachings in society, utilizing the absolute reference frame, if we don't have any form of respect for ourselves and any form of respect for the Quran and the Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as he just mentioned, then how can we expect others to have respect for us? We have lost that respect. And that's the point. On the one hand, we need to speak out against falsehood. We need to speak out against propaganda. We need to speak out against stereotypes and religious stereotypes. But at the same time, we need to build a more inclusive dynamic, universalist community which is there. When the Quran says, Ya ayyuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakari wa untha, wa ja'alnakum shu'uba wa qabaila li ta'arafu, who is it addressing? It's addressing humanity, an-nas, humankind. When Allah is described as Rabbul Alameen, Alameen doesn't mean world or earth, it means worlds, dimensions, intergalactic. What are we doing to get this message out there? If we do not get this message out there, we're going to find that stereotype, propaganda, hate, and animosity is going to be writ large and manifest amongst many. And we will be continuously fulfilling the stereotypes and the definitions that Western society, in inverted commas, wishes to place for us. It's time for us to go back to the Book of Allah that we claim to respect. Not just read it for spiritual benefit, but read it with a means in terms of which we not only implement in ourselves and our lives, but use it as a basis and as a beacon in terms of which it assists humanity at large and becomes a book of guidance for the rest of the world. And so I'd leave you with that point. Wa akhiru da'wana, alhamdulillah rabbil alameen.
Jazakallah for that, Yusuf. Very thorough and scholastic. If we had a Q&A session, I don't know what questions we're going to ask this man, because he answered everything. And I've got about 10 questions that came through here. And if I go through this, Yusuf, you've spoken about ISIL, you've spoken about, media. And I think Malcolm X said it, the media is so powerful that it can have you loving the oppressor and hating those that are oppressed. Besides the hypocrisy of the West, the hypocrisy in the House of Islam is a major problem.
The classic case of Raif Badawi. Raif Badawi, I wouldn't call him an Islamic activist in the true sense, but he's an activist. Raif Badawi called for reverting to the absolute reference frame that you find in the time of the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. In other words, calling to that paradigm. He didn't do it in the fashion that bin Laden is doing, where they're atomizing scripture or doing it for his own agenda or gain. But he did it in a legitimate sense that in our communities, there's no freedom in the Saudi community, Saudi society. We can't have this engagement in Saudi Arabia. Are you aware of that? If we have this engagement like today, we would probably all be arrested. We wouldn't be allowed to have a debate that we had at the Jummah Masjid about 2 months ago, where we focused on. It's a way of inviting Christians into the masajid and you educate them about the Quran, about Islam, and so on. He's obviously going to give you a critique. He's going to challenge the Quran, but we had a debate. We won't be able to have that in Saudi Arabia. We won't be able to have an Islamic propagation center. The imams, for example, have to be mandated and basically censored by the state in terms of what you say, what you speak. It's like state dictating you. And any form of state dictatorship or state repression or any form of censorship on that level begs a question, why? Why does it exist? And the only reason it exists is because of inherent fear. I give the Saudi example as an example because of the fact that Badawi's case hasn't been given any form of publicity in the mass media. He's been sentenced to 1,000 lashes. If you see him now, it's not Islamic. He's been sentenced to 1,000 lashes because he's challenged the authority in Saudi Arabia and he's challenged their interpretation. And he's criticized one or two princes and members of the royal family. But he hasn't questioned the monarchy on a whole. If he had questioned the monarchy, he would have probably been put to death. Now he's languishing in hospital and is being given 20 lashes every Friday. And they trumped up charges of apostasy against him. They trumped it up. There were no charges of apostasy against him. The point why I was mentioning his case is that those same people, the Camerons, Francois Hollande, Prince Charles, all these individuals that were talking about free speech and free expression, why is it that they had the flags of their country at low mast when King Abdullah died? Why? It's because of political expediency. Because financially, whether a person is repressive or not, if he's in your pocket or you are in his pocket and you are on the receiving end, then it becomes very easy to overlook the abuses that are being committed. And so within the context of what I discussed today, and Shafat's question about munafiqeen, this is a classic example of munafiqeen that you see manifest large. People who claim to represent Islam, however, defending a private fiefdom in the name of Islam, but in actual fact engaging in activity which is un-Islamic and totally something we need to speak out against.
What the Quran said about blasphemy?
Okay.
It's a very good question. It's an interesting question because there is no clear-cut answer on this particular point. You see, I could stand up and say, and this is my particular belief, that the Quran is silent on the term of blasphemy or the punishment for blasphemy. For example, you'd see a passage in the Quran which says, وَقَالُ اتَّخُذُ الرَّحْمَنَ وَلَدًا, and they say that Allah, the most merciful, has begotten a son. لَقَدْ جِئْتُمْ شَيْئًا إِدًّا, indeed you have put forth a monstrosity, a blasphemous assertion, but there is no penalty for that. It, for example, condemns the idea. It says, وَلَا تَقُولُوا ثَلَاثًا إِنْتَهُ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِنَّمَا اللَّهُ إِلَهُ وَاحِدٌ. That is a blasphemous assertion where you say that Allah is one of three, and therefore you are basically condemned for that particular suggestion of yours on a spiritual level, but there is no physical penalty. So, for example, for a Christian to make a blasphemous assertion against Allah, that is the most blasphemous assertion you can make, that Allah has begotten a son. It's viewed as blasphemy in the house of Islam. There is no penalty which says now that you are to kill the person, or you are to assassinate him, or you are to murder him, and so on and so forth. So, from the perspective of the Quran, there is no blasphemy punishment. However, there are some scholars that refer to, and I don't know whether I should introduce this at this particular time because it's a controversial issue at this late stage in the lecture, but there are some people that refer to Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 36. إِنَّمَا جَزَاءُ الَّذِينَ يُحَارِبُونَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَيَسْعُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَسَادًا أَن يُقَتَّلُوا أَوْ يُصَلَّبُوا أَوْ تُقَطَّعَ أَيْدِيهِمْ وَأَرْجُلُهُم مِّنْ خِلَافٍ أَوْ يُنفَوْا مِنَ الْأَرْضِ ذَلِكُمْ لَهُمْ خِزْيٌ فِي الدُّنْيَا وَلَهُمْ فِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ عَظِيمٌ. How many of you know Arabic here? Any brothers? Brothers, do you know Arabic? Brother, Arabic? I take it you understood what I read. You've understood what I read. This verse was used by Ayatollah Khomeini to justify the death penalty against Salman Rushdie. What this verse basically says, and I'll tell you how it's been misappropriated. The literal translation is, the punishment of those who wage war against Allah and His apostle and strive with might and main for mischief of the land is execution or crucifixion or the amputation of the hands and feet from opposite sides or exile from the land. This is a disgrace in this world, and a heavy punishment is it in the hereafter. Now, many people have used this to say that this is basically can be used to apply to blasphemers. But there's no basis behind this. Even if we were to look at it from the literal perspective, it's speaking about those who wage war against Allah and His apostle. Now, if some imbecilic cartoonist goes and draws a picture of a stick or an image that looks like Bart Simpson and he puts on a beard, I mean, is the Quran so limited and so shallow, or should Islam be so shallow to consider that stupid drawing of his as a war against Allah? Are Muslims so narrow-minded in that sense? If you were to look at the verse from the broader perspective, it speaks about actual war. But the noted scholar Muhammad Asad, in explaining this verse, this is what he says. He says most of the classical commentators take this verse as a legal injunction and interpret it as such, as I've read it out to you. Punishment of those who wage war against Allah is execution and crucifixion and so on. However, he takes into account two things. If this is a legal injunction, he challenges Muslims, if it was a legal injunction, give me one case where any individual has ever been crucified in Islamic history. And you can't find it. There's not a single case where an individual in Islamic history has ever been crucified, if this was a verse of penalty for punishment. Secondly, he says that the verses or the verbs that occur in this verse are as follows: yuqattalu, which is translated here as slay, tuqatta, which is translated as cut off, and yusallabu, translated as crucified. He says in terms of Arabic grammar, yuqattalu does not signify to slay, but it signifies they are being slain in great numbers. Tuqatta means they are being cut off in great numbers, and yusallamu means they are being crucified in great numbers. And the usage of the term are, from his perspective, denotes that this verse is a commentary, if you like, of the existing society that Jahiliyyah was enveloped in. And so he translates it as accordingly. He says that in that light, this is how the verse should be read, it is but a just recompense that those who make war against Allah and His Apostle, that they are being slain in great numbers, and are being crucified in great numbers, and are, as a result of their perverseness, have their hands and feet cut off in great numbers, or are being banished from the face of the earth. Such is the ignominy in this world, but in the hereafter, more suffering is to come. What he's pointing out is, as a result of this constant warfare, either physical or spiritual, that they're engaging in against Allah and His Apostle, because of that, they are in a state of position where they are engaging constantly in sanguinary warfare, they are killing each other, they are massacring each other, and this is their perdition that's going to happen in this world and in the hereafter. So basically, this cannot be viewed as a declaration or an injunction, but rather as a statement of fact in terms of what is happening at a particular point in time in Arabian society. The other point he mentions is this, is that in Surah Taha, chapter 20, verse 71, and in Surah 7, verse 124, the same verses are used, but in that instance, they are used in the future tense. And the person making the pronouncement is Fir'aun. And here he asks a question, how is it that Fir'aun, who could be described as the enemy of Allah, could prescribe the same penalty that Allah Himself prescribes? Would it make sense? Of course it doesn't. And so from that perspective, he goes on to say that this verse read on its own, from that, as many of the classical mufassirin have pointed out, and looking at the language of Arabic grammar, this is not a verse of intent, it's not a legal injunction. But even if we were to read it as a legal injunction, it cannot be understood as a passage or a verse denoting penalty for blasphemy. Nevertheless, there is a school of thought within Islam that says that there is a punishment for blasphemy. But if you look closely at that school of thought, you'd find that those people who propose the idea that blasphemers should be punished, there has to be due process that needs to be followed. There's no such a thing as laissez-faire killings where you just go like a armed assassin and start gunning down people. It doesn't work like that. But the majority seem to suggest that from the Quranic point of view, there is no actual worldly punishment for blasphemy. Because the Quran says, "La ikraha fid din, qad tabayyana rushd min al-ghayy." Truth stands out distinct from falsehood. There is no compulsion. People are making blasphemous comments about Allah. They're saying He's one of the three. They're saying He has a son. They impute to Him the act of generation, begetting, an animalistic act. And there's no penalty for that in the Quran. Rather, the Quran asks you to engage with these people, reflect, call them, ta'alaw, taghlu fi dinikum, do not go to extremes in your religion, think, ponder, reflect, and invite them to the message of Islam. So coming to your point, there is no punishment for blasphemy in Islam. And there are also other, I can go further and I'll end on this and then we'll go on to the next question. There are many allegations in the Quran which refers to the general view held by the Qurayshi community and of course the pagans, where they made the allegation that this book is tales of ancients. It is abusive. It is, this book is a fabrication, it's a forgery. They took the intestines of a camel and they dumped it on the Prophet ﷺ when he engaged in making salah. Did he take personal revenge? Was there any stage in the prophetic history where he ever took personal revenge for people abusing him, for people insulting him, and for people mocking him? And so if we want to say that we want to follow the true sunnah, following the true sunnah is also following the prophetic paradigm in terms of behavior. In fact, I cannot purport to say who these brothers are, but there are certain questions that are basically raised here. I'll deal with the first part of the question about people who are maligning Islam. If you look at the shootings, the video, for example, and I think we can probably, if the sound's on, the video basically contradicts the reality of what you see. And I want to show this to you. This is from InfoWars.
Paul Watson has filed a report. I'm going to play about 4 minutes of it here. It's an 11-minute report. If you're a radio listener, you need to go to Infowars.com/show to see the video feed if you want to be able to see this, or go watch the full report at prisonplanet.com where Watson has it posted. Weird footage prompts claim of Charlie Hebdo conspiracy. Video contradicts reports of police officer being shot in the head. Here is part of Paul Watson's report.
Hear this. The argument is that the police officer was shot in the head, right? By an AK-47. How many? You've got experience with guns. If I shoot you with the head, what happened to Riva Steenkamp when she was shot with not an AK-47? Exploded. Now look at what happens to, I think this captures it, but look at his head.
Some more thoughts on the attacks in France. And first of all, this video contains no graphic footage whatsoever, no violence, no blood. I say that because my first video on this subject was removed from YouTube and then only reinstated with an age restriction, despite the fact that it had no footage whatsoever of any violent action. But to start off with, obviously this is a video that a lot of people have been talking about, and Storm Clouds Gathering has done a good analysis. It shows the 2 terrorists involved in the Charlie Hebdo siege executing a police officer, the first on the scene, who of course was the Muslim himself, Ahmed Merabet. And as you can see from the footage, which I will not play, but you can see linked down in the bar below, they apparently wound him first, then walk up to him and shoot him in the head. The problem with this explanation, as a lot of people have pointed out, is that shooting somebody at point-blank range with an AK-47 in the head would produce at least some blood splatter, if not complete obliteration of the head. What we appear to see from this video is a gunshot that hits the pavement, bounces away, and doesn't actually go into the police officer's head. So people are legitimately asking questions as to why the mainstream media has widely reported the fact that this Muslim police officer was executed in this moment, having been shot in the head. When you watch the video, it appears as if the shot is fired a foot away from the officer into the pavement. Here you see the residue from the shot as it apparently hits the pavement. The officer shows no reaction to being shot in the head. There's no violent movement of the head backwards. So people are asking why the media is reporting that this officer was shot in the head when this video appears to suggest otherwise. Does this mean that the entire attack on Charlie Hebdo, as well as the attack on a Jewish grocery store, was staged, was a hoax, that nobody ever died in these attacks?
All right, let's stop right there. You can see the full report. Watson goes into discrediting that. We had callers day one saying they believed it looked like a fake gunshot. And I kind of disagreed with them, saying it could be fake, could be part of a PR stunt. But there's a big problem with that. I personally have shot deer and wild hogs and other large mammals in the head. And with high-powered, 7 mil mags, sometimes the more powerful the rifle, the less blood, it'll go in an eye, go all the way through the top of the skull, skimming through the top, and then shoot out an ear. And there'll just be a tiny bit of blood. Or you'll shoot a hog in the head. Feral hogs, there's like 5 million of them in Texas alone. They eat people's dogs, cats, you name it. People didn't know pigs do that. They do that. And you'll shoot a hog in the head and blood splatters everywhere. Or you shoot a deer. I've shot a deer through its shoulder with a .308 at like 30 yards away. And there was less blood than if I shot it at 200 yards away, because the bullet's going so fast it just goes right through, even though it was a soft point. So you never know what bullets are going to do. Troops have been shot with a .223 and it goes in a shoulder and comes out their foot. Just bullet ballistics can do anything. So the fact that his head doesn't blow up, that shows a lot of people don't know how bullets act. It could be fake. I'm not saying that. BBC's even out saying, it doesn't make sense. I was just told today they've come out with a video we'll play later and post on Infowars.com under Watson. So, but I mean, how many BBC producers know how bullets act? Joe Biggs, former staff sergeant, a lot of combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, as reported by Michael Hastings. Of course, when he was embedded with him off and on for years, saw a lot of combat. And I've shot wild hogs, I've shot deer before with high-powered rifles, and there's almost no blood. Sometimes there's a ton of blood. Sometimes their whole head blows off. I don't mean to be macabre here, that's just part of hunting. And you better hunt wild hogs. There's 5 million in Texas alone. They'll eat your dog, your cats in your backyard. They're vicious wild boars. Now, Joe, I said, Joe, have you ever shot anybody in the head or seen it where there's not a bunch of blood? Because it's a big conspiracy now. It's in the media saying it looks like there's no blood when the cop gets shot in the head outside Charlie Hebdo. I think these are real terrorists that attacked. And I've said that. Clearly the West let them on no-fly list, didn't stop them, helped give them a base in Syria. I think that's terrible. So the West, at the end of the day, has helped sponsor this and will now take our freedoms as a response to it while letting record numbers of radicals move in. But just as a side tidbit, Joe, I've shot wild hogs, a lot of them, and seen where a lot of blood, doesn't show up. I don't mean to get graphic, but I've shot a wild hog with a 7mm mag in the side of the head. The whole side of the head opened up. That didn't happen with the cop. The brain basically blew out, but almost no blood. I've also shot a hog through the eye, came out the back, almost no blood. Now, you said that with humans, that's not the case, that blood just fountains everywhere. You've seen the video. You think it's pure bull. What do you say as an expert on this?
With a high-powered AK-47 at that kind of a close range, number one, is going to do some damage on a target. We could take an AK-47 out right now, put a watermelon down on the sidewalk, shoot at it from arm's length away. You're going to see some damage to that. So that's not consistent at all either. Something that close with a 7.62, his head would just be completely annihilated. And then you see there's no recoil in the weapon. Now, that's consistent with shooting a blank. I've shot blanks in different training exercises. The M4 will not react the same way. It doesn't have the same kind of recoil to it when you have an actual round in there where it'll actually kick back. So you don't see any kind of kickback in AK-47. These are not really big guys. I don't see them being so strong they can overpower that AK-47's recoil. And then, like I said, the consistency, you don't see the blood. You also see the pavement on the sidewalk up from the head. You see a ricochet of some sort away from where the head is. So a lot of it doesn't add up to
maybe he didn't kill the cop with a headshot and killed him with the woundings. He's on the ground. I'm just not going to go and say the whole thing's fake because of this.
Yeah.
Well, because the MO doesn't fit with that.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting. And then, they find in this guy's locker that he's got these ISIS flags and all this stuff in there. It just seems a little...
Well, we know they've staged stuff before, so
I said this last week, too, though. I said, I even told David Knight, I was like, watch, there's going to be a video that comes out from one of these guys. Something like that's going to happen. And here we are. They have this video that's being released. So the whole thing, I think, is just, it stinks to high heaven. Yeah.
That came out in the news that the CIA was watching it and basically let him manipulate Hassan into doing that. So I want to know why he gets to dine at the Pentagon. That's in the London Guardian. Why is a Lockheed? I could play Colonel Schaefer saying he is a triple agent. It's beyond triple agent.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I just don't get what we're doing. We lock up innocent people for, marijuana charges, but when we let these guys go and commit these heinous acts
Yeah, they'd been in prison. They were on Facebook saying they're going to attack. Why do we need more NSA surveillance to keep us safe when it doesn't keep us safe?
Well, they want people to be so scared they stay at home all the time, and then they can monitor you at home with all those cameras in their TVs and your microwave and in your coffee machine. It's just they're trying to build you a prison system to live in. Your cage will be your home.
It is. It's 1984. Thank you so much, Joe Biggs. Yep. Well, there's the other take on it. Some of the listeners are criticizing me, saying that the whole thing's fake. It's all theater. None of it happened. No, the evidence is this really happened. And now they're going to try to take our liberties and take our free speech.
But the point is that from what you can see, there's a lot of questions in terms of what happened in the shootings and so on. That's a classic example. The story is that he was shot in the head. Now, we condemn the shooting, and what you see is that clearly the residue, there's a lot of gun residue. When you shoot, the actual impact of the bullet hits the pavement. The problem is that he may have died, we don't know. Why is the mass media repeatedly stating that he was shot at point blank in the head, despite this, which goes to indicate that we are basically being lied to at some level. We are being lied to on this particular issue. The point about the fact that the concealment of identity was there throughout, the execution was professionally conducted, and afterwards these people are conveniently leaving their ID cards behind in a getaway car so that they can be identified. Then what's the point? They could have easily have gone with their faces opening like the Lee Bigby. You know the Lee Bigby shootings in stabbing in London, where they stabbed Lee Bigby, the Lee Rigby, I think, the British soldier, these two Nigerian men. Again, they were monitored by British intelligence, by MI5 and MI6, and they stabbed him. And they openly spoke out, I'm doing this for Allah, and so on. But the point is they never conceal their identity. In this case, we have a case where people are concealing their identity, and then they're leaving their ID cards behind, which raises issues in terms of what happened and what transpired. And therefore, more so, for us as Muslims, not to take polarized positions where we go and support these people. You see, if these people they genuinely did something to avenge what they believe, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ's name, they were wrong from an Islamic point of view. They were wrong. There's no question about that. But right now we don't even know what the agenda was, what the operation was, and the fact that these people had been monitored repeatedly with their telephone calls being screened, and then at the critical juncture, at the critical point in time, they were basically not monitored. They were not identified. The difficulty is this, that they never actually went to Charlie Hebdo's headquarters first. They actually, I'll tell you where, they rocked up at another place which they confused. I'm going to read the article out to you. I think I've got it here with me. They actually rocked up at a place which they believed was Charlie Hebdo, and then they realized, before the shooting, the two armed and hooded men burst into number 6 Rue Nicholas Appert, the address of Charlie Hebdo's archives. The gunmen shouted, "Is this Charlie Hebdo?" And after realizing their mistake, left for the magazine's headquarters at number 10 Rue Nicholas Appert. And there they encountered the cartoonist Coco Ray outside. She said that the men spoke perfect French. Using threats, forced her to key in the passcode to open the door. Now this is from Wikipedia, which is the online encyclopedia. It's not a conspiracy theory site, but something which raised to myself is that all of us, when we speak, we have a particular style of speaking. There is no universal South African accent. You speak differently to how a white would speak. We all have our distinctive style of communication. In France, you find that the Algerian population, they speak French. Moroccans, for example, there are distinctive nuances in terms of how they speak and how they communicate. But here, the lady who was encountered just immediately prior to having entered the main section where the shooting took place, stated that the men spoke perfect French and forced her to key in the passcode to open the actual door. So it raises a number of questions. I don't know what happened. Our position should always be, we condemn these particular actions, and we also ask the rhetorical question that in any criminal action that we see, at the end of the day, who benefits? It's clear that Muslims don't benefit from this at all. We don't benefit at all. If they thought that they were going to achieve in basically shutting down the magazine and destroying the cartoonists, well, they failed. Because from 20,000 distribution outlets and 20,000 printing that occurred on a weekly basis, it moved to 6 million the following week. So in other words, it had the opposite effect. And the fact that this had the opposite effect raises a question what I personally see it, again, as another, and this is just a personal opinion, as a means in terms of which French authorities will further introduce legislation to curtail the civil liberties of minorities, introduce perhaps gun control laws, and legislation which targets minority communities.
Okay, Jazakallah for that, Yusuf. And Yusuf is in the mood of answering another question. There was a question from the floor here which said, do you think this Charlie Hebdo is a false flag operation? And I think you answered, you alluded to that. Here's another question here. People have been duped and straitjacketed by the Zionist media more to exercise, Yusuf, their stomachs rather than their brains. How would you react to that, Yusuf?
The question was, as I understand, people have been duped by the Zionist media. Yes, I agree, we have been duped by mainstream media. The problem we find is this, is that a large number of, this is the background. In the 1900s, there was a large Eastern European immigration to the United States. A lot of them, for example, happened to be Jewish. A lot of them eventually went on to create what we would call small media outlets. Someone, for example, like Walt Disney, Jack Warner, Metro, Goldwyn, that's a producer of the James Bond movies, that later became Metro, Goldwyn and Mayer. A lot of these individuals were Jewish individuals, and so they spawned these particular enterprises, media enterprises, particularly dealing with entertainment. And what basically happened is that over a particular period of time, because of the investment, these media spawned, became far more huger, and then over a period of time there was more centralization. You see, in the 80s there were large media outlets. Now more and more is being centralized and centralized. So for example, I say it's Azan, we're going to break for Azan. Time Warner controls Warner Brothers, Time Magazine, Warner Entertainment, CNN, and so on and so forth. The point is that the centralization of mass media is being controlled by people who have a very particular sympathy for the state of Israel, for the Zionist enterprise in general, and in a broad sense, not surprisingly, the information that is out is filtered and it's manifest through certain selective channels. In other words, what wants to be heard, they basically allow it, and what is not being heard, they do not allow it. But again, our challenge is to provide an alternative. We need to provide alternative media. We don't provide the alternative media. Sometimes we find legitimate stations like Al Jazeera being created and spawned and then subsequently taken over by other groups and other media interests. But as community in general, we don't get together and create a general consensus where we have legitimate media to present an alternative. You know, when we even form on a limited scale our own small media stations, we engage in self-censorship. We don't create a free, open forum where we can engage and debate ideas. Certain issues are taboo. We cannot discuss certain aspects. Certain elements are problematic to debate. So if we cannot create the level of debate in our own communities, then how can we adequately provide an alternative platform where we not just provide a voice for ourselves, but a voice for the oppressed, a voice for the downtrodden, a voice for movements like the anti-globalization movement and so on. We don't create an open society in terms of how we view ourselves in relation to the rest of the world, then certainly we cannot provide an alternative to the enraged froth that you see emanating in the mass media.
I'll leave you with this anecdote which states, you will not know truth by men. You will not know truth by men. Rather know the truth, and then you will know the men that are truthful, inshallah. Jazakallah to all of you. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
We are the Muslim Ummah.
Alhamdulillah, 1 in 5 people in the world is a Muslim. But have we considered that 4 out of 5 people may die without Islam? 4 out of 5 may never get the chance to read the glorious Holy Quran. Become a lifetime partner with the Islamic Propagation Center International Dawah Quran Project and help bring real solutions to the 4 out of 5 people searching for answers. By sponsoring a Holy Quran, you give the gift of life, real life. IPCI, Dawah Quran Project. It's time to get involved.
Call IPCI now. IPCI, encircling the globe with the message of Islam.